Reborn in the empire where the sun never sets to become a pirate. Hey, fanfic family. So glad to see you here again to continue this incredible adventure. As always, kindly remember, this story is 100% fiction, so don't go looking for dimensional portals in your closet. All rights to this fantastic novel belong to the original author. We're just your humble narrators of epic tales. Are you enjoying the fanfic? Show it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and dropping us a like. And if you're impatient for more exclusive content, our Patreon is your happy place. Chapter 1: The Age of Exploration. A Shattered Dream. In the dream, the tunnel cracked open like a spiderweb, and chunks of cement fell in front of the car. Yellow water surged in from all directions, churning into huge waves that lifted Zheng Anyue and his car into the air. Falling. Zheng Anyue sat up suddenly. The iron bed frame swayed with a creaking sound, and the cloud-like silk quilt slid from the side of the bed, silently landing on the floor. Where is this? He stared blankly at the classic and luxurious English bedroom before him, his dilated pupils gradually converging. Memories returned. He hugged his head and smiled bitterly. Why does it feel like I'm wearing it all over again? This is home. Home was a luxurious bedroom covering 100 square meters. A huge iron chandelier hung from the plaster ceiling, and the floor was covered with an Axminster woven carpet. The pale yellow cashmere wallpaper on the walls was the latest steam-woven fabric. Atop this hung an oil painting depicting the fierce naval battle of Gravelines. Beneath the painting sat a pristine white wrought iron bed. The soaring curved grating of the bed frame was inspired by London Bridge. Beside the bed stood a Gothic-style wooden bookshelf, opposite a Georgian-style armchair nestled against the fireplace. The fireplace was unlit, but a simple hearth, barely 2 palms wide, surrounded it and held 3 exquisite ornaments. On the far left was a display of Dao porcelain from the Chengho era. In the center was a wooden table clock in the shape of Big Ben. On the right was a model of a sailboat named the Golden Deer. The plaque on the model read, "To Lorraine, my dear brother." Lorraine was Zheng Anyue. 3 years ago, a devastating mudslide transported him from 21st century China to 18th century Europe, where he became 15-year-old Lorraine Andrew Drake, the second son of the hereditary Drake Baron family. A strange environment, a strange era, and unfamiliar figures. He had thought himself ignorant of this era, having fortunately escaped a near-fatal assassination and inherited everything a drowned boy had: a strong body, exceptional talent, and a happy family. He naturally settled into a carefree new life. He didn't need to dwell on the future, for in this era, he knew no more than Lorraine himself. The Drake family was a traditional naval family. Their ancestor, Francis Drake, was a legendary figure in British naval history and one of the founding fathers of the Royal Navy. Over 200 years ago, he sailed the Golden Hind across the Atlantic under the orders of Queen Elizabeth I. As a privateer, he plundered French, Dutch, and Spanish merchant ships in the New World, earning him the dreaded title of Dragon of the Seven Seas. Later, Spanish warships blocked his path home, and he became separated from his men. South of the Strait of Magellan, he discovered a new route to the Pacific, the Drake Passage. The Drake Passage broke the Spanish and Portuguese monopoly on east-west trade routes, catapulting British maritime merchants to prominence. Francis became the second adventurer in the world to circumnavigate the globe, and the first to command the entire voyage. Upon his return, he returned to military service. As vice admiral, he led the Battle of Gravelines, defeating the Spanish Armada and propelling England to the status of a leading maritime power. Francis was knighted for his service, thus establishing the Drake family. Today, his descendants are indispensable leaders of the Royal Navy. Lorraine's father, Elia Drake, is the current patriarch, a hereditary baron and vice admiral. Recently, Elia was appointed admiral of the Royal Navy's New World Fleet and, awaiting the delivery of his new flagship, HMS Lion, he was about to depart for Kingston, Jamaica, to take up his new post. Lorraine's half-brother, Sir Francis Drake, was the next patriarch. 10 years his senior, he was now a lieutenant commander in the Royal Navy, captain of HMS Sea Lion in the Channel Fleet, and held a promising future. Lorraine was no ordinary man either. From the age of 8, he had sailed with his relative's fleet, visiting India, America, rounding the Cape of Good Hope, and even aboard research vessels bound for the Arctic. After drowning in the Arctic, the new Lorraine returned to shore and, with Aria's help, enrolled at Plymouth Naval Academy. He spent 2 years studying drill, command, charting, fencing, and navigation, achieving top marks in all. As a third-year student at the academy, he was already a petty officer in the Royal Navy, captaining a commando boat on HMS Heir. After this vacation, he would participate in a year-long naval drill cadetship. Once he passed the naval drill, he would be commissioned as a lieutenant, a young officer in the Royal Navy. This was Lorraine's original trajectory. By middle age, he might have become a general, a colonial governor. He hoped to reach the East Indies, because it was close to China. Perhaps one day, as a foreigner, he could use his identity to enlighten his fellow souls. However, heaven had played a huge joke on him. This morning, Arya had returned from the docks in Devonport and teased him about a trivial anecdote among the aristocracy. The famous anti-British fighter, Mr. Patrick Henry, had delivered a speech at the just-concluded Virginia State Assembly, saying, "Give me liberty or give me death." Lorraine had never heard of Mr. Henry before, but this slogan unexpectedly awakened his memories of his past life. 1775. A speech to the Virginia State Assembly, the sound of gunfire in Lexington. Washington will take up the banner of American independence. The thriving War of Independence is about to begin, and a great era is about to dawn. With the loss of the fertile North American colonies, Europe's conflicts will intensify. The French Revolution is imminent, and Napoleon will rise from his dilapidated Corsican farm to forge his own kingdom across the vast European continent. Washington, Napoleon, Archduke Charles, Peter I, and the two British heroes who would put an end to Napoleon's reign, Nelson in the Navy and the Duke of Wellington in the Army. It turns out I wasn't completely ignorant of this era. Lorraine endured a day and a days, only to fall into a vivid nightmare at night, reliving the mudslide in even more devastating detail. For a moment, he could barely recall anything, as if he had been transported all over again. Why? What was heaven trying to tell me, experiencing such a nightmare at this time? He scrambled out of bed and walked barefoot to the dressing mirror. In it, he saw a tall, lean, white teenager. He had curly black hair and brown eyes, and his skin was pale, even paler than the average Caucasian. He was tall, with long, slender arms and legs, and a muscular build. A hybrid of Viking and Anglo-Saxon, he possessed intelligence, strength, and skill, possessing the composure of 2 lifetimes. And a distinguished family. The great age is coming. With all this, are you willing to be a mere sailor who obeys orders? He muttered to himself. Suddenly, in the corner of the mirror, he caught sight of the reflection of the Golden Hind. Francis Drake's ship, the Golden Hind, was sailing over the fireplace, head held high, sails inflated, braving the wind and waves, unwavering. Lorraine walked over and gently picked it up. The Golden Hind, a light galleon, is 23 meters long and 6 meters wide. It's fully square-rigged, with a jib sail, a topsail and a spritsail between the masts, and is armed with 18 cannons. It was the flagship of Francis Drake, the legendary pirate, adventurer, merchant, and officer, known as the Pirate King, and its owner is just a privateer. Lorraine's eyes grew brighter, gleaming brighter. Privateers are the true darlings of the age, ever-changing. Facing enemies, they are ferocious pirates. Facing friends, they are generous merchants. Encountering mysteries, they are fearless adventurers. Entering battlefields, they are valiant warriors. They sail the vast 7 seas, piloting superior ships of the same type as the Navy. On one hand, they are the rulers of backward nations, while on the other, they are the wealthy and powerful in the civilized world. Free, independent, confident, and self-righteous. He wanted to be like this. Because the coming new era would be the last and most magnificent, the age of exploration. PSHMS is the abbreviation for the Royal Navy of Great Britain. Every ship in service must be officially designated with this prefix to indicate its full name. PS2. On August 8, 1588, England and Spain clashed in the waters off Gravelines. The Spanish Armada consisted of 130 ships and nearly 30,000 men. England expanded its fleet from 34 ships to 190, with 16,000 men, a roughly 2-to-1 advantage. The battle ended with England's surprise attack, while the Spanish army encountered a storm during their retreat, with only 65 ships returning to port. Incidentally, the original meaning of Invincible Armada is Lucky Fleet, and historically, fleets that have claimed this title have invariably met with disastrous consequences. Hence, a cheap name is easy to live with. Chapter 2: The Noble's Cleanliness. It was April, the springtime was bright and the grass was green. Lorraine stood on the green meadow in front of the manor, holding a rapier. He wore a white shirt, starched as hard as cardboard, A black vest, breeches underneath, pure white riding boots over the breeches, and gold-rimmed gloves on his hands. He stood straight, his expression serious. His left hand was behind his back at his waist, and his right hand was raised high in front of his rapier. The slender and long sword blade was aligned with the center axis of his body, and the tip of the sword just covered his eyebrows. The shiny curved guard was facing the opponent, and the fist holding the hilt was folded in front of his chest, so as to hide the fingertips that were slightly white from the force. This was a fencing lesson. His teacher and opponent was the middle-aged gentleman with a beautiful mustache across from him, who was also his father in this life, Baron Andrew Drake. Lorraine nodded slightly to Arya. Arya raised his sword in return, saying, "Don't hold back. I'm not like those mediocre men in the Naval Academy." "Yes, father," he said softly, and Lorraine lashed out with his sword. He stomped his foot hard on the ground, his rapier thrust forward like a venomous snake, piercing his opponent's throat. Arya effortlessly deflected the sword, spun sideways to Lorraine's side, and swung his hand. The strike aimed at Lorraine's arm, forcing Lorraine to turn, sheath his sword, block, and counterattack. Arya immediately stepped back. In this move, he not only dodged Lorraine's second strike, but also accelerated like a spring, the tip of his sword piercing Lorraine's brow. So fast. Lorraine was startled. In the final moment, he tilted his neck to the side, letting the wind brush his cheek, while raising his elbow to block Arya's arm. This was no fencing move at all. Arya was caught off guard, his middle open, and Lorraine took advantage of the opportunity to advance and deliver a sweeping side kick. Bang! Their shins collided hard, breaking apart on contact. Lorraine leaped back, then recoiled. Just as he was about to draw his sword, Arya suddenly said, "That's it." Lorraine barely managed to break. He came to a halt, gasping for air twice before standing straight, sword raised, and nodding to Arya as he had at the beginning. Servants came forward, offering towels and taking their swords. Elijah wiped the beads of sweat from his forehead and said unhappily, "Lorraine, you're distracted. I'm thinking about Mr. Henry's declaration." "Mr. Henry? That smug redneck from the New World." "Lorraine, give me liberty or give me death." "No redneck would say that," Lorraine said with a wry smile. "North America is prepared for bloodshed, but from what you've said, England doesn't have a similar awareness, because they're not worthy of being considered an adversary yet," Elijah sneered, pointing to a nearby parasol. "Go, Helena is waiting for you." Lorraine followed Elijah's arm and saw a noble woman in a blue dress standing beneath the parasol. She had the same black curly hair and brown eyes as Lorraine, and a gentle expression as she waved gently to him. Her name was Helena Arthur, Lorraine's biological mother in this life. A Viking, she was also a pagan who believed in her ancestors. A descendant of the Icelandic conqueror Ingjerd Arnarsson, she was originally an Icelandic fisherman. She met and fell in love with Arya at sea, bravely moving to England and becoming the most unwelcome barbarian among the aristocracy. The English nobility treated Helena, who refused to abandon her ancestral faith. Even after 17 years of devoted love, no one was willing to officiate their wedding. Therefore, legally speaking, Lorraine was still a bastard, a unique child, beloved by her family and never wronged by her status. Lorraine admired Helena's courage in pursuing love and Arya's generosity towards his beloved. A devout Puritan, he not only accepted Helena's faith in her ancestors but also allowed Lorraine to follow Helena's beliefs, not being baptized or practicing religion. He even inherited his mother's middle name, openly branding himself a pagan. If this wasn't love, then what was love? Lorraine quickly stepped forward and took Helena's arm. "Mother, I just saw you break the rules." Helena tapped Lorraine's forehead. "What a little rascal, it's a pity it wasn't thorough enough." Lorraine shrugged. "If I had been able to hold my father's arm just now, that kick would have knocked him down. A true gentleman will not let himself fall in front of a beautiful lady even if his leg is broken." Arya came up with a chatter, took Helena from Lorraine, and asked with concern, "Why did you come out? Don't forget that you are coughing, and it's not suitable to get a breeze now. My husband and son are going to see." Helena coughed lightly. "It's just a little cough. It's not worth wasting my time with them." In the meantime, the servants set up tea under the umbrella. The three of them sat around the round table. Helena took off her gloves and asked softly, "What were you talking about just now?" "Lorraine thinks the country bumpkins in the New World will provoke a war, and he's worried that I'm not prepared enough." "War?" Helena frowned. "At this time, don't worry about me, Helena. Elijah patted Helena's hand. Baltimore only has fishing boats, but the Lion is the most advanced third-class ship. Facing 74 large-caliber cannons, the outcome of all resistance is doomed, but they have a long coastline, but you can't leave your defense zone, and you can't even fire at will. Lorraine absent-mindedly added milk to his tea. Father, I want to drop out of school, quit school. Lorraine's sudden attack caught Elia and Helena off guard. Arya frowned deeply. I know you want to serve on the Lion as soon as possible. But if you drop out of school now, you have to start as a sailor, exchanging 3 years for 1 year. I can become a captain directly. Lorraine interrupted Arya, without looking at the surprise on his face. I hope you can give me Francis's letter of marque, and lend me another 3,000, no, 1,000 pounds. In 3 years at most, I will take the fleet to the New World, which will not only make up for your shortcomings, but also make profits for the family. You want to be a businessman. Arya was in disbelief, his face flushed with anger. Drake's descendants actually want to be businessmen. Uncle Fran and Uncle Misha are the family's merchants. Even Francis Drake was a privateer when he was young. Francis was not a noble when he was a privateer, and Fran and Misha, they are abandoned sons in name only. Lorraine put down the milk jug and sat up straight. Father, you and my brother need an excellent privateering fleet as a tactical supplement. After the war in the New World. That's not something you should be thinking about. Arya stood up abruptly, speaking each word with a measured emphasis. You should be thinking about becoming a good sailor, not a profit-seeking businessman. Father, I think your vacation is too long. Starting tomorrow, I'll be on board the ship, and let Sir Leighton take care of you. Yes. Looking at Arya's furious back, Lorraine's brows drooped, a feeling of resignation. He realized he had overlooked the realities of Britain. After the Glorious Revolution, a constitutional monarchy, one that ruled without governing, was essentially established in Britain. However, power remained in the hands of the conservative new aristocracy, with the Drake family representing and serving as their core force. In the eyes of these nobles, the only legitimate careers for their children were politics or the military. If both options proved unsuccessful, becoming a scholar or doctor wouldn't tarnish the family's reputation. But they absolutely could not become merchants or lawyers. These professions lacked integrity, were profit-driven, and their reputations were incompatible with the traditional aristocratic ideals of purity. While these professionals were indispensable to the family, those who actually took charge of the professions were often illegitimate children, nominally expelled from the family. Lorraine felt very depressed. How fitting, I'm just a legitimate child. He thought to himself, but didn't dare to say it in front of Helena. He just couldn't imagine that the first obstacle in pursuing his dream would be the selfless care of his family. This is really... Helena coughed lightly twice. You are too reckless. P.S. On the eve of the Industrial Revolution, the nobles and gentlemen of England stubbornly believed that businessmen and lawyers were lowly professions, even if they earned more. This was the mainstream social cognition at the time, which was basically the same as that of the feudal period in China, but with slight differences. The difference is that Westerners look down on businessmen, but respect wealthy businessmen. Chapter 3 Naval Exercises and Emergency Messages. Tick. Tick, run, boys, you are the glorious cadets of Plymouth, destined for greatness. Destined for extraordinary things. Destined to die at sea. Destined, long live Great Britain, long live our king. On the calm waters of Plymouth Bay, a small galleon sat at sea. Countless young men ran furiously on its deck, their sharp whistles and disparate shouts resonating through the air. This was HMS Heir, the training ship of the Plymouth Naval Academy. Captain Sir Billy Leighton, a distinguished lieutenant in the Royal Navy and the Academy's most infamously fiendish instructor, was Lorraine. 15-year-old boys, rising early each day for drill, ran around the deck, fought, climbed the sails, rappelled down the ropes from the lookout, then leaped into the sea by stepping on the bowsprit, secured lunch from a buoy 5 kilometers away, and swam back. After lunch, they began the relatively easy practice of gunnery drills, including maneuvering rifles and cannons, running back and forth across the deck pushing heavy guns, jumping overboard, diving, and snagging dinner entrees from the anchor chain's iron rings. Even after dinner, they couldn't rest. As sailors, they had to scrub the decks, tie sailors' knots on every rope, and furl and mend the sails, even though the Heir's sails never had a hole. Then could they sleep? In theory, yes, as long as Sir Leighton didn't suffer from insomnia and dream of a fire on the ship. If he did, The boys would spend half the night pouring water on the spotlessly clean decks, then spend the rest of the night mopping up the water marks, ready for the next day's repetitive training. 007 Life is so much more fulfilling than 996. Standing high on the observation deck, Lorraine gazed with emotion at the distant silhouette of the British Isles. He suddenly untied his headscarf and wrapped it around his hands. With a gritted teeth, he grabbed the rope and leaped. Wow! Half an hour later, a wet Lorraine staggered back to the deck and slapped a thin sheepskin strip on Sir Leighton. Sir Leighton put down his pocket watch in disgust. 42 minutes and 16 seconds. Little Drake, you are 1 minute slower than yesterday. Didn't you sleep well? Thanks to you, sir, the people on this ship have not slept for 2 hours for 2 consecutive days. If you continue to have nightmares tonight, I think I will die suddenly in the cabin. Don't try to trick me, you devil, the knight laughed. Your classmates are still in the water, so you have half an hour to rest. Heavenly sound. Hearing the heavenly sound, Lorraine slapped his feet and pounded his chest. Thank you, sir, you deserve it, but you have to remember, my target is not the classmates around me, but the damn Horatio Nelson. Lorraine raised his hand with his back turned. You say the same thing 3 times a day, sir. Your insomnia should be treated. Late at night, people are not quiet. In the era of sailing battleships, the accommodation conditions of sailors have always been poor. Because space on a warship was limited, to conserve space, sleeping quarters were mostly located on the gun deck, where the guns were stowed. Hundreds of men huddled in a cramped cabin, sleeping on the floor, surrounded by artillery weighing tens of thousands of pounds. If the gears on the gun carriages slipped or broke due to the ship's swing, the consequences would be disaster. But precisely because of this, the best students were entitled to sleep on rope beds. Simply hooking a net to a hook, they could perch high above their guns, swaying and resting comfortably. Lorraine's bed was a rope bed, one end against the gun muzzle and the other connected to the outside of the cabin, allowing him to flip over and escape to the VIP seat. He lay on the rope bed, resting his head on his arms, listening to the various sounds of grinding teeth and snoring beneath him, staring through the small gun portholes at the deep, infernal darkness of the night. Unknowingly, 6 months had passed during the naval exercises. The gunfire of the Lexington arrived as expected. In Virginia, in Massachusetts, all along the east coast of North America, the future United States National Guard, like guerrillas, launched fearless charges against the British colonial garrisons, showing no sign of retreat, despite heavy losses. In just a few months, nearly 100 soldiers had died, and such devastating losses had finally alerted London. A month and a half earlier, HMS Lion had been officially commissioned into the Royal Navy after its sea trials were suspended. Eyre rushed to Devonport and took up his new flagship the very next day. Based on the time the fleet had left England, he should have been inside of the Kingston coastline by now. The problem was, Lorraine still hadn't been able to convince him. Several father-son gatherings in Devonport had been less than encouraging. Lorraine tried to reach out to his brother, Shark, who also served in Devonport, for help, but even Shark sided with Eyre. No matter how he tried to persuade a group of stubborn, devoted English nobles, Lorraine was helpless. Even though the naval exercises were about to conclude in 6 months, even though he was about to receive his official commission and become a distinguished officer in the Royal Navy, he was still not even 18 years old. English law requires that every young person under the age of 18 be under guardianship, and every life decision requires a guardian's signature, including resignation. Therefore, Lorraine would likely have to serve in the military until he turned 18, only then reaching legal majority, before he could embark on his journey to pursue the life he desired. 2 more years. Mumbling a few words about English law, Lorraine turned over to prepare for bed. Suddenly, he saw a swaying light signal on the sea, 3 long flashes, 1 short. An emergency communication from the Naval Academy? He closed his eyes in confusion, and with that question in his mind, he fell asleep. He didn't know how long he slept, but before daybreak, the third mate woke him. Little Drake, quietly get out of bed and report to the captain's cabin immediately, sir. For some reason, Lorraine thought of the urgent message before bed. Sergeant Cadet Lorraine Drake, captain of the air assault boat, enter. Yes. Outside the towering stern cabin, Lorraine checked his attire one last time. His leggings were tied tightly, his buttons fastened securely, and his turban and sword were in perfect condition. His uniform and shirt were wrinkle-free. He took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and entered the cabin. Sir Leighton sat at his small drinking table, a frown on his face, a pipe dangling from his lips, a half-empty glass of brandy, and a parchment roll sealed with wax in front of him. He gently exhaled his smoke. "Little Drake, do you know why I called you here?" Lorraine stood straight, his eyes fixed, his voice high. The third mate said nothing, so the student knows nothing. The knight nodded with satisfaction. "Take a guess." "The student is a soldier, and soldiers don't make guesses." The knight smiled, growing more satisfied. "So what did you observe?" "Emergency communication, sir." The time was between 10 p.m. and 10:30 p.m., because that was the shift change. Judia greeted your mother when he got up. This wasn't snitching. Lorraine's expression was formal, so formal that Sir Leighton couldn't tell whether it was Judia scolding him or Lorraine. He who knew nothing was blameless, and since Sir Leighton couldn't identify the suspect, he could only refrain from blaming anyone. He nudged the parchment scroll in front of him with his pipe. "An urgent letter from the Naval Command, specifically requesting your permission to read it." "Yes, sir." Lorraine snapped his legs together and quickly picked up the scroll. He first checked the sealing wax, then grasped it with both hands and tucked it away at his waist. "Sir, would you like me to read it aloud? The Naval Commander has ordered it. You can decide whether to tell me, and how much to tell me." "Yes, sir." Confused, Lorraine gently peeled off the sealing wax and unrolled the scroll. After a few breaths, he raised his head with a hint of apology, his voice suddenly lowered. "Sir, I may have to disembark early." Sir Leighton's brow furrowed. "Disembark early?" His voice was thick with undisguised discontent. "You only have 6 months left of sea drill. If you disembark early, your grades for that subject will be invalidated, and your official commissioning will be delayed until the year after next." "Sergeant, I need a reason. My father." The Lion was caught in a storm en route to the New World, its mainmast broken, and Vice Admiral Elia Drake, the admiral of the New World Fleet, died for his country. Lorraine's voice trembled slightly, and the scroll in his hand unconsciously clenched into a ball. "My father is dead, and my family wants me to end my studies immediately and return to Tavistock, to take care of his funeral." PSA sailing ship has 3 deck types. The forecastle and stern are called the upper deck, the deck is called the main deck, the interior of the hull is called the inner deck, and the inner deck where the guns are mounted is called the gun deck. Deck counting generally starts from the highest upper deck, so those massive ships occasionally had 13 decks, but not for the 13 tiers of guns. Most of these belong to the upper deck of the poop. Chapter 4 I Want to Smell the Sea. 1775, Europe was calm, yet a storm seemed imminent, its oppressive force making one tremble deep within. In September, the British Royal Navy's New World Fleet entered its rotation period. New Admiral Sir Elia Drake, aboard his new flagship, HMS Lion, one of the Royal Navy's most advanced third-class warships, was tragically killed in a storm while en route to his post. And then, 6 months passed in a flash. Lorraine lay in a small room, eyes closed. A brown wooden door stood ajar on the left, and a bed made of spliced logs sat opposite it. Streaks of mold covered the walls. Following the mold, at the foot of the bed, sat a half-worn cabinet with a double-leaf upper compartment and 5 drawers below. Fine cracks in the wooden frame were the only pattern on the cabinet, and staring intently, one's mind would inevitably wonder when the cabinet collapsed. They were the only objects in the room, Lorraine's new home for the entire 6 months. The town of Tavistock, Devonshire. Less than 2 kilometers from the magnificent estate of the hereditary Baron Drake, a narrow, endless path connecting the two places seemed a formidable chasm to Lorraine. He was the second youngest of the Drake family, or rather, he had been. 6 months earlier, his doting father had died en route to the New World. 4 months earlier, his elder brother had inherited the title and, as if a completely different man, had driven him, his illegitimate son, and his unnamed pagan mother, out of the old house. 2 weeks earlier, Helena, who had been in poor health, had passed away. In that moment, 16-year-old Lorraine finally severed his connection with the world. He was free, whether or not this freedom was what he wanted. Lorraine opened his eyes, picked up the tattered backpack hanging at the foot of his bed, and walked out the door with a blank expression. Today was a crucial day. His nominal master and final guardian, Shack Francis Drake, would inform him of the family's final decision on his behalf. What would the outcome be? Lorraine didn't care. He walked into the living room with a cold smile. Looking up, he saw Shack, who had been standing there for a long time. Shack was dressed in a well-tailored tuxedo, clutching a short staff inlaid with emeralds. His handsome face was stiff with seriousness, his ocean blue eyes gleaming, but he didn't look at Lorraine. Lorraine curled her lips in disdain. "Can't find a place to stay in the farmhand's house for the time being, my dear Master Drake." Shaq still didn't look at Lorraine. His gaze drifted, like the mold stains on the wall were a beautiful sea map. "Don't be sarcastic, my foolish brother," he said. "You should remember that sarcasm is the false dignity of the weak, nothing more, but I've always felt that self-righteous arrogance is hypocrisy." Lorraine walked over, pulled out a chair, and slammed his feet on the table in front of Shaq. "Your Excellency, where's my judgment?" Shaq's brows frowned slightly. He stamped his cane, and the butler Foki came in carrying a large leather suitcase. He first bowed to Lorraine, then carefully lifted the suitcase and placed it on the table where Lorraine rested her feet. Lorraine tilted her head to look. This was a very good suitcase, made of buffalo leather, 90% new, with clear shamrock patterns printed on the light brown leather surface, each one blooming with the Irish countryside style. Lorraine did not ask what was in the box, but just nodded at Foki. The box opened quickly, revealing the neatly organized interior in front of Lorraine. On the left and right sides were parchment documents framed with glass and enamel, and in the middle were 300 gold pounds neatly tied with leather ropes. In England, 300 pounds is a huge sum of money. Even if a middle-class family did not eat or drink, it would take about 10 years to save this amount of money. Lorraine couldn't help but laugh. "You're such a generous sir. The family believes you need to live a respectable life, even if you're exiled. It's a sign of Drake's reputation. They're so lenient." Lorraine stopped paying attention to the gold, put her foot down, and gently slid her slender fingers across the glass. Two documents. The one on the left, from the prestigious Cambridge University Law School, contained a formal admission, while the one on the right, "In the name of the King, I grant Mr. Drake the right to defend the legitimate interests of the kingdom at sea and to attack the enemies of the kingdom. Elizabeth I, March 27, 1571. This was the letter of marque Lorraine had longed for all year. 200 years ago, Elizabeth I awarded it to Francis Drake. With it, the dragon of the seven seas roamed the world, rising from an insignificant bankrupt merchant to become a legend at sea. 200 years later, it still holds the sacred and inviolable legal force. With this thin piece of paper, the King of England authorized merchants to legally and at any time transform themselves into pirates, plundering enemy ships worldwide in the name of the kingdom. Seeing it, Lorraine's smile widened. "Is this your final decision, lawyer or merchant?" "This is the family's verdict," Shaq said, still standing straight. "The family believes that unworthy descendants choosing disreputable jobs are more suitable grounds for expulsion than having illegitimate children or pagans." Drake's face again. "Huh?" Lorraine spat, pulled the privateering license from the box, stuffed it into his backpack, and immediately stood up and walked out. As they brushed past Shaq, he suddenly said, "You know? I smell freedom." "That's your illusion," Shaq replied coldly. "It's not an illusion," Lorraine said, each word measured and firm. "When I return all this to you in front of Mother, you'll know it's not an illusion." Shaq smiled for the first time. "Giving up the gold pounds means you're penniless. Do you really expect to come back before I die of old age?" "I will come back," Lorraine shook her head gently. "Shaq, you're a descendant of the first Lord Drake, a traditional and proud nobleman of England, but I'm not. My veins flow with the blood of Francis Drake, the dragon of the seven seas, and Ingel Arnarsson, Lord of Iceland. The descendants of pirates never accept charity, we prefer to take what we want ourselves." A torrential downpour suddenly arrived. The torrential rain washed over the streets and hills of Tavistock, washing away the stains and dispelling the gloom. On a hillside sheltered from the sun, a new, nameless monument, without a cross, stood alone. Its square shape tilted northwest. A delicate pansy flower is carved on its summit, and below, in English, Viking, and simplified Chinese, are epitaphs with identical meanings. "Here lies a foolish woman. She was once a daughter of the sea. She gave up the sea for love, but after losing her beloved, she failed to find her sea again. She longed to smell the sea. She failed, her body turning into bubbles in this valley without a seascape. May Njord not forget her, and raise a storm on the sea, sweeping across the dry valley. May she find the way back to the ship city of Nudung, and not drift forever in the sky. May her soul rest in peace. May her lover not go to heaven. They first met at sea, and should ultimately remain together at sea. A ghost who does not exist in this world. Zheng Anyue, engraved in CE 1776, P.S. CE refers to the Common Era, the beginning of the Catholic Christian calendar. Originally abbreviated to AD, Latin, before the birth of Christ it was BC. Later, after it became the mainstream common calendar, it was renamed the Christian Era, namely, CE, and the BC era was BCE. Chapter 5 13 shillings and sixpence. This is the smell of the sea. 6 months later, Lorraine returned to Plymouth, but things had changed. This was one of the most famous ports in England, Europe, and even the world, belonging to the Great Royal Navy. The mighty Channel Fleet was stationed here, and Plymouth Naval Academy, the glorious predecessor of the Royal Naval School of Great Britain and Lorraine's alma mater, held classes here. Devonport was the heart of Plymouth. The world-class Devonport dockyard stood beside the Red Lighthouse, where the finest shipbuilders toiled day and night to build one stunning and powerful sailing warship after another for the Royal Navy. Long rows of mooring piers, like floating islands on the sea, served as these massive warships, flying the Union Jack, sailed out to sea, their spirited sailors singing on their decks. Perhaps because of Devonport's immense fame, people often forget that along the tranquil Plymouth Sound lies a string of civilian ports, like pearls. They, too, were part of Plymouth. For a long time, they were the preferred port of departure and return for the English. Port Soto was a civilian port. Like most civilian ports, it was chaotic and free, with houses built haphazardly. Behind the gleaming, tidy docks lay countless grimy alleys, a haven for filth and iniquity. Walking through them, one could encounter devout priests, flamboyant adventurers, hard-working farmers, coquettish prostitutes, as well as swindlers, brokers, lawyers, artisans, and bankrupt craftsmen. Of course, the most common sights were the sweating dock workers, the drunken, down-and-out sailors, and the true spirit of England, the greedy, fearless, and cunning sea merchants. Leaving Tavistock, Lorraine exchanged all his money for a carriage ticket to Port Soto, carrying his tattered leather bag, and made his way to a pawnshop called Three Urgent Needs. Before he could trample Shaq's arrogance, he had to eat. Across the high counter, almost reaching the tip of his chin, the honest black clerk was pricing Lorraine's most valuable item with an extremely professional attitude. A pocket watch, it works. The black man glanced at the table clock in the shop. It's a mess. It can hardly be considered a watch. Lorraine shrugged. Miniaturization of watches is a new trend that has only emerged in recent years, and accurate movement is a fantasy. Most of the time, pocket watches are still just luxurious accessories, a symbol of aristocratic status. Seeing that Lorraine had no objection, the black man closed the watch cover, took out a monocular jeweler's mirror, and put it into his eye socket. An emerald, about 2 carats, the cut can be given an 80-point score, but the quality is a bit poor. The dial is made of silver, with scratches, many scratches, and dirt. He frowned, took off the jeweler's mirror, and looked at Lorraine solemnly. Sir, can we be more careful next time we rob? Jewels are as delicate as white women. A gentleman shouldn't step on their faces with his boots. If I were planning to rob, Lorraine emphasized the word if, I would respect your opinion. Black brother felt a little regretful, because Lorraine was very cunning and unwilling to admit that the pocket watch was dirty, which deprived him of a legitimate reason to lower the price. He wrapped the pocket watch with black velvet and put away the identification tools on the table. Sir, this is a broken pocket watch with a 30% new hand. Our store is willing to sell it for 8 pence. How much? 8 pence. He made a 6 with his fat black palm and said confidently, I dare say this is the highest offer in the port area. Everyone knows the owner's generosity. Only 8 pence. Lorraine frowned. Give me back the pocket watch. Black brother's face changed slightly, and he subconsciously tugged at the black velvet at his hand. Sir, I guarantee with my master's reputation that you won't find a shop with higher prices than ours even if you search all over Port Soto. Why waste your time, really? Although Lorraine had grown up with a silver spoon in his mouth and had indeed had no chance to make a living in this life, but in his previous life. His little action alerted Lorraine. With a snap, Lorraine slammed the sword at his waist onto the counter and asked with a smile, Do you recognize it? Black brother swallowed hard. This is the Royal Navy Lieutenant Commander's sword. Lorraine spoke word by word, slowly and methodically drawing the sword, brazenly displaying its gleaming edge before Black brother. It and the pocket watch belonged to the same person. 10 years ago, that man used this sword to kill a French baron in a boarding, captured a 4th-class warship, and stepped on the pocket watch on your hand, earning him a promotion. The scratches on the pocket watch are from that battle. and the pattern on the back is the Baron's family crest, recorded on page 162 of Noble Heraldry. You should take a look. Lorraine paused, raising his eyelids to glance at Hij's face. Do you know how they ended up in my hands? Hij's distinct black and white eye sockets were slightly bloodshot. He suddenly realized that this young man before him, although his black hair and brown eyes were not aristocratic, and his shabby clothes made him look like a homeless person, his words and actions, his manners, his posture, all reflected a good upbringing, and he carried a strong and rigid military temperament. A young man who had served in the military and received a good upbringing. Such a person could only have one identity. Lorraine smiled and pressed the sword to his heart. You know what? According to English law, if I stab him with my sword, I'll probably be ordered to pay 6 to 8 shillings in compensation for accidental damage to national property. I believe this pocket watch is worth slightly more than that, and after paying the compensation, the remaining amount will still be far more than 8 pence. Lorraine's sword tip shifted, lifting the name tag on Blackie's chest. Mr. Friday. I didn't expect your master is a fan of Mr. Defoe. Mr. Friday, do you think I should stab him? 13 shillings and 6 pence. Friday's face darkened as he spoke quickly. My master has gone to Spain, and this is the only authorization he has given me. If you pay me 1 more penny, he will kill me when he comes back, and he won't have to pay compensation to anyone, although it's still a little short. Lorraine sighed regretfully and sheathed his sword. But, deal. Which ship needs sailors? The docks of Port Soto were full of ships of all kinds. There were the cokes, the most common coastal merchant vessels, the small, single-masted sloops, and the occasional snark, the more heavily masted snack. But nowhere was the 3-masted galleon, the current mainstream of the Navy and best suited for long-distance sailing. This wasn't surprising to Lorraine. Port Soto was a gathering place for small merchants, primarily engaged in coastal trade. For the calm winds and waves of the Strait of Dover, older sailing vessels were cheaper, with no significant disadvantages in cargo capacity or speed, making them the ideal choice for these coastal merchants. Lorraine had intended to start here, accumulating capital while observing the trade techniques of contemporary maritime merchants, but things weren't going as smoothly as he had hoped. The port was bustling with people, and almost every ship needed dock workers and sailors, but very few had any need for seamen. Even the few that did show up were reluctant to interview Lorraine after noticing his age and appearance. In the merchant world, a distinguished individual like a seaman could only emerge from among experienced sailors. They served as both technical workers on board the ship and foremen of the sailors, serving as the captain's assistants. Naval Academy students who had received formal instruction were, of course, an exception. The problem was that although Lorraine had been an honors student at the academy, he had dropped out and lacked the necessary credentials. Now, despite his impressive resume, his words were hardly convincing to strangers. Having been rejected 4 times in a row, a somewhat disheartened Lorraine dragged himself to the central square. Looking at the carefree pigeons, he sighed and pulled out the rye bread he had just bought. While rye bread had a rough texture, it wasn't expensive. For 2 pence, you could get a dictionary-sized loaf, enough to last a week. It was also dry and kept well, making it a perfect seafaring staple. Lorraine broke off a small piece, ate a little himself, then crumbled it up and spread it out for the pigeons. The pigeons quickly gathered around his bench, huddling together and cooing, making it difficult for him to concentrate on his self-pity. Lorraine muttered to himself, "What do you mean by get it yourself? I can't even get on a boat now. How am I supposed to get it?" He chuckled to himself, put away his bread, and stood up, ready to continue his efforts. Suddenly, he saw a crowd gathering at the fountain, just like the flock of pigeons gathered around him. A voice echoed from the crowd. "The Addis Chamber of Commerce is looking for experienced seafarers who can sail, and we also welcome those interested in business to invest. I have ships. Big ships, PS 1 pound equals 20 shillings equals 240 pence. PS2. Before European unification, currency was in turmoil, with the mid to late 18th century and early 19th century being the most chaotic, as the French Revolution overthrew the monarchy and Napoleon brought it back. Since they generally used gold, silver, and copper as their currency, all monetary concepts in this book have been automatically converted to the imperial system. Similarly, because British weights and measures are somewhat awkward, I have automatically converted them to the metric system for easier reading. Chapter 6: The Beauty of the Atis Family. The man shouting from the fountain was a slovenly man. He had flaxen, curly hair and green eyes, though they were cloudy and unclear. He was overweight, with a short neck and a round belly. He wore a worn, ill-fitting shirt and dark brown suspenders with incomplete crotch buttons. The sleeves of his shirt were rolled up, revealing arms that were too muscular for his build and large, bony hands. There were noticeable yellow spots on his fingers, and mud was thick between his nails. The mud was the main reason why Lorraine thought he was slovenly. Medical care was scarce during the voyage, and any decent sailor would pay close attention to personal hygiene, even if they couldn't shower regularly to avoid leaving dirt between their fingers. But a closer look overturned Lorraine's initial assumption. He wasn't slovenly. His clothes, though shabby, were clean, and even his hair was neatly combed. As for the mud on his fingernails, it was probably some kind of stain that had been difficult to wash away for years. Sailors disliked overalls because they weren't loose enough, and the cumbersome straps and buckles would hinder agility on board. So this fat man wasn't a seafarer. Judging by his appearance, he was more likely a landlubber in middle age who'd suddenly decided to venture out to sea. Lorraine, rubbing his chin, hid in the crowd, watching the landlubber shout in vain by the fountain. The Addis Chamber of Commerce is looking for seafarers and sailors, and we also welcome young people with ambitions to become shareholders. We're very strong. We have ships. Big ships. Suddenly, someone in the crowd shouted, "Sir, have you ever been to sea?" The fat man faltered, though I haven't been before, but, can you swim? Someone else asked. If you, sir, fell into the water, how many people would it take to pull you out? Everyone burst into laughter. The fat man's face flushed blood, and he stiffened his neck in the middle of the crowd and insisted, "I can swim. I've swam in the river back home and even fished." The jeers grew even louder. Amidst a constant stream of jeers, Lorraine slowly raised his hand. "Sir," he asked, "I know how to sail. I just want to confirm one thing, do you actually own a boat?" His voice reached the fat man's ears like a heavenly sound. The fat man's eyes lit up, and he nodded hurriedly. "Yes. It's docked at Pier 13. It's a brand new, large ship. A real seagoing vessel." Lorraine smiled. "I just happen to have 13 shillings. I wonder what percentage of the stock I could get if I invested it." As the sun set, the fat man, who had enjoyed a long day, walked dejectedly down the street. Lorraine followed at a distance, covering his nose to avoid the unpleasant odor. The fat man's name was Lake Artis, a Devon native. He ran his family's tanning workshop in Plymouth and was a skilled leatherworker. The burn marks on his fingers and the strange odor of saltpeter and rotting leather on his body were evidence of his extensive experience. However, these things were of no value to a maritime merchant. Despite his tanning skills, he was still a distrusted landlubber. After a long day of toiling, only Lorraine, an equally distrusted teenager, was willing to join the nascent Addis Chamber of Commerce. Besides them, the chamber lacked even a single qualified sailor. This frustrated Lake. He'd heard that his ship needed at least 8 qualified sailors, and he only had 1. So whether he was up to the task was uncertain. His dream of sailing was over. Heartbroken, Lake led Lorraine to Pier 13, determined to prove his credibility. After inspecting the boat, he planned to sell it and use the proceeds to repay the tannery's massive debt. Now, the time had come to part ways. Standing at the dock, Lake pointed to a large ship moored on the sea and whispered, "Young man, this is my boat." "I wasn't lying to you." Lorraine slowly lowered his hand. Under the fiery sunset, a large, slightly plump ship sat quietly at anchor in the bay, gently bobbing with the waves. She is 30 meters long and 8 meters wide, with a pointed bow and a broad stern. The only thick mainmast stands upright in the middle of the ship, 22 meters high. The clean sail cables are pulled diagonally downward, connecting the mainmast with a slender 3-meter-long bowmast. Lorraine recited softly, "The Hansa Coker-type sloop, one of the most famous designs of Nordic ships, is famous for the Hanseatic League. Its characteristic is the first use of a central rudder at the stern. It has been developed to this day, with a standard length of 30 meters, a width of 8 meters, and a mainmast of 22 meters. The Coker type has a spacious interior cabin and bottom, and sails smoothly in shallow waters. Because it uses a huge horizontally hung square single sail, it can maintain an excellent speed in a downwind environment, but performs poorly in a headwind environment. After the introduction of the Arabian bow sail, its biggest defect was remedied. The design has been finalized for more than 400 years and is still widely used in the North Sea and the Mediterranean with its low cost and stable performance. The standard crew is 8 people. Lake's eyes lit up when he heard it. Young man, you seem. Lorraine laughed at himself. I used to be a student at the Naval Academy. If it weren't for changes in my family and I had to drop out of school early, I would probably be on board by now. Lake smiled bitterly. I thought he was an ordinary young man, but I didn't expect that I actually picked up a treasure. What a pity, sir. Are you worried that there aren't enough people to sail the boat? Lorraine suddenly asked. Huh? Lake was at a loss for a moment after his worries were exposed. Don't get me wrong, you're a good person, you just want to do business, so you have to sail the boat out of the port first. And sailing a boat is a job for 8 people, no matter how capable you are. In fact, I can sail this boat by myself. Lorraine touched the tip of his nose. Because the design is older, its operation is not complicated. Huh? Lake stood there, watching the boy run, step on the pedals, and jump onto the boat. Lorraine scurried to the bow, like a nimble monkey, crouching on the tip of the bowmast, holding onto the rope. Sir, I haven't asked yet, what's her name? Beauty. Lake hissed at Lorraine as if awakening from a dream. Her name is the Addis Beauty, so it's the Addis Beauty. Lorraine gently stroked the smooth bowmast beneath his feet, a smile gradually forming. I didn't expect it to be a fat girl. The Addis merchants, consisting of only 2 people, bustled furiously. Lake was responsible for purchasing the goods and hiring the workers for transport. Lorraine busied himself with waxing the deck, oiling the anchor and rudder, and inspecting the sails, ropes, cabins, and keel, ensuring everything was intact. As a disciple of Sir Leighton, he trusted only the knots he and his companions made, so he untied and retied every knot, working with great pleasure. He even painted a 2-meter wide square in red paint in the center of the deck, extending from the stern cabin to 5 meters from the bow, horizontally and vertically. Lake brought the cargo aboard and looked at the glaring red box in surprise. Little Lorraine, what is this box for? This is your captain's area. Lorraine clapped his hands. After leaving the port, you will only have so many places to move around on the deck, and you must wear a lifebuoy. Sir, you are too fat. If you fall into the sea, I can't drag you up. Huh? By the way, since we are crossing the strait, you should have bought the corresponding nautical charts. Right, navigation charts are expensive. Lake looked thrifty. I heard that as long as you sail with the wind, you will soon drift to the Netherlands. If nothing unexpected happens, the Beauty will become the trophy of the coachman. That's basically it, huh? Go ahead. Lorraine waved his hands lazily. As the first mate, helmsman, navigator, lookout and boatman on the ship, I also need a monocular, a compass, a pair of thick linen gloves and some supplies. I will trouble you for everything, Captain. Thank you. Vote and collect. Thank you for your support and encouragement. Chapter 7. Let's go to France. Everything at the Addis Chamber of Commerce was proceeding smoothly. First, every nautical tool, from nautical charts to needles and thread for mending sails, was fully stocked. Lorraine wrote the orders. Lake paid for most of it. Lake had no money, and the charts were the lowest quality mimeographed copies from a bookstore, with crude printing and blurred images. Only 7 or 8 major ports along the channel were marked. However, this didn't pose a problem for Lorraine. His final project in the Naval Academy's cartography course was a 1773 edition of the military channel chart. Now with the coastline and longitude and latitude as reference, refining the chart took him only a day and a half. Then there was the issue of the chamber's shareholding. After deducting the cost of all the tools, Lake's share capital remained at 30 gold pounds. Lorraine had offered 13 shillings as a share when he joined, but Lake confiscated it and instead invested his technology, giving Lorraine a 10th share. Thus, Lorraine was promoted. He was now a partner of the Chamber of Commerce and also served as vice president. Finally, and most importantly, the destination of the maiden voyage. Lake learned from a broker that the port of Cherbourg, France, had a shipment of contraband porcelain for sale, offering excellent quality and a low price. Lorraine's supplementary nautical charts happened to show the location of the port. After a heated discussion, the Chamber of Commerce's leaders unanimously decided to head for Cherbourg. After 7 days of preparations in port, the Addis Beauty, laden with fresh Plymouth vegetables, officially set sail on a clear, breezy day. Lorraine locked the rudder with a click, sprinted to the mainmast, and swung the sail halyard up the boom. "Weigh anchor," he shouted. Lorraine, clad in a lifebuoy, exerted all his strength to crank the capstan. The long iron chain clattered to the surface, the sharp anchor hook gleaming coldly in the morning sun. Lorraine smiled and tore off her turban, letting the bright red scarf flutter in the wind. Northeast, light breeze, 3 knots, he leaped from the boom, dropped the halyard, and with a whoosh, unfurled the jib. The bowsail bulged, and the attisbell rode the waves, swaying slowly away from the shore. Lorraine secured the bowsail, ran back to the helm, raised his hand to release the buckle, and gripped the handwheel tightly. "Captain, give the order." Lake, trembling with excitement, held on to the capstan and shouted to the sky, "Target Cherbourg. Attisbell. Hoist the sails. Set sail." No land could be seen on the vast sea. All that could be seen was various shades of blue, deep blue, light blue, and occasionally a big fish jumped out of the water with a splash, shattering the blue. The sky was also blue, a clear blue without clouds. In the sunshine, a few seagulls squawked and flew leisurely, their eyes reflecting the scene on the sea. A fat Kirk-type merchant ship was lazily drifting on the sea, sailing against the wind, smooth and slow. Lorraine sat at the bow, legs bent, one hand supporting the boom of the bowsail, the other clutching a quill, consulting the chart and compass, occasionally scribbling in his notebook. Their luck had been terrible, the wind had been constantly against them for the past few days. The shortcomings of the Coke type were clearly evident in such weather. Lorraine couldn't use a square sail, relying solely on a small triangular bowsail to maintain a base speed of 0.5 to 1 knot. At this rate, it would take 3 days to reach Cherbourg. A few more days wouldn't be a problem, but the boat was full of fresh vegetables. If they drifted this way by Cherbourg, wouldn't they wilt? How could the boat be made faster? Lorraine pondered. He was lost in thought when a shrill, low voice suddenly reached his ears. Ugh! His train of thought was interrupted. Lorraine had no choice but to put down his pen and complain to Lake. "Sir, you're disturbing me." Lake, leaning against the mainmast, clutching a large wooden barrel, his face as pale as paper. He laughed bitterly. "Little Lorraine, you have to get used to it. Young people need to concentrate in a noisy environment in order to..." Ugh! Lorraine rolled his eyes and slightly moved the bowsail along the wind. "Didn't I give you advice? Go to the cabin to vomit. If you have to be dirty, just get dirty. At least you won't dirty the deck, but the cabin. Ugh! The cabin smells bad, and it shakes more violently. I think I might die. Ugh! Die at sea. Every naval cadet knows that he will die at sea. It's not worth bragging about, I swear to God. This is a curse." "Ugh! A curse? Not bragging?" Lorraine shrugged and asked in confusion. "Sir, you are a shoemaker, and a good shoemaker. I can't understand why you came on board, because..." Ugh! After going through a lot of hardships, Lorraine finally found out the whole story before Lake died. Lake was a skilled leatherworker. As he recounted, the artist tannery had survived in Plymouth for 3 generations, once setting the standard for fine leather in Devon. Then came the advent of steam engines. A wealthy businessman purchased 3 steam engines in Plymouth, replacing some of the manual labor and establishing a large-scale tanning operation. While machine-made leather wasn't as soft as tanned leather, it was still plenty soft and far cheaper. The Lake family tannery was devastated, and business plummeted. Struggling to keep the business afloat, he had racked up a massive debt of £50 over 3 years, teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. Just when he was at his wit's end, God opened a window for him. His beloved second cousin had returned to God and left him a vast fortune in her will, the artist's beauty. A standard key cost £500, and the half-used beauty was worth around £300. He faced 2 choices: sell the boat and save the tannery, or sell the tannery and pursue a new career in a completely new field. Lake bravely chose the latter. He pawned his tannery to the steamworks for £20, and mortgaged his family's ancestral property to a gentleman for £15. With these £35, he stepped out of his comfort zone and arrived in the unfamiliar port of Soto. Through chance, he and Lorraine eventually came together. Hearing this, Lorraine couldn't help but smile bitterly. "So, sir, you're risking everything now. What if this voyage ends in disaster? What else? What else can I do?" Lake wiped his mouth and took a few breaths. "If I can't make any money, I'll have to sell the beauty. Pierce is still at home, and I'm a useless father, but I can't let an 8-year-old child lie on the streets, without food or clothing." Lorraine shouted in shock. "You actually have a son? Where's your wife?" "Dead. Dead. Pierce and I depend on each other. And there's no one else in the family." "At least you still have your son." Lorraine walked over and gently patted Lake on the back. "Even for his sake, you should adapt to life at sea. Believe me, this voyage won't end in disaster. His blessing had barely fallen when a cool breeze suddenly blew from the sea. He straightened up in surprise and tore off his headscarf. The bright red scarf danced like an elf in his palm, rustling in the strong wind. Lorraine murmured, "The wind is from the southeast, force 5, a stroke." Ugh. Lorraine kicked the lifeboat in frustration. Lake's fat body swayed, and he looked up pitifully. "Little Lorraine, the boat seems to be, shaking even more, because your god is cheating again." "Huh? Cheating, sir?" Lorraine took a deep breath of the fresh sea breeze. "If you could go to the cabin and disgust yourself now instead of getting in the way here, before nightfall, you would see the coastline of Cherbourg." Lake hurriedly dragged the wooden barrel to the stern cabin. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Lorraine quickly folded the bowsail, untied the mainmast halyard, exerted force, and raised the sail. The huge square cross sail rose up, and when it reached the top, it was as bulging as a full moon. He shouted into the wind, "Hold the wind! Full sail! Njord, hurry up, take us to France." P.S. Njord, leader of the Narking gods in Norse mythology, was also the sea god of the Aesir, controlling wind, fire, and currents at sea. He was also the god of summer. Yes, he was the ancestral faith of the Lorraine people, and Arnerson's descendants believed they were descendants of Njord. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 8 North African Angel on the Garbage Dump. Black Harbor isn't a specific term, but rather a general term for a particular type of port. These ports often lack formal names, being referred to as Black Harbor, Black Market, Mirage, or False Town. Sailors often refer to them as Hurlo. Hurlo means hauler. Most black harbors once flourished, but were destroyed by natural disasters, man-made calamities, or simply because they were insufficiently prosperous, insufficiently open, or even because they engaged in activities that displeased those in power. In short, they were abandoned. Lost in attention, lost in investment, lost in hope. Like abandoned women, they drifted into desolation. Just before their utter ruin, they attracted the attention of black marketeers, gangsters, pirates, or even enemy navies, finding a twisted new life. Amidst their debauchery, they desperately awaited their inevitable next downfall, like a downtrodden noblewoman fallen into prostitution. This was the case with Cherbourg's Black Harbor. At sunset, the Atis Belle, with its square sails billowing, leaped from the horizon, cutting through the waves and entering the waters of the Black Harbor. This region is densely packed with reefs and jagged rocks, with only a few hidden, winding channels, less than 15 meters wide, leading to a tranquil harbor nestled between Twin Peaks in the distance. Centuries ago, before sailing warships completely abandoned their flat bottoms and oars, this port, with its excellent defensive terrain and natural sheltered harbor, was long favored by the French. Back then, it was called Cherbourg. From that time on, the name Cherbourg became associated with the French Channel Fleet, becoming its base. The French invested vast manpower and resources, building docks, piers, lighthouses, and all the necessary military equipment. Merchants also flocked to the port, and it flourished for over a century. However, with the advancement of shipbuilding, the once prosperous channel gradually became a hindrance to large ships. The military port was first relocated, with a new Cherbourg built 100 kilometers away in the more open bay, stripped of its name. Soon, merchants abandoned the port, and it began to decay. The dock collapsed, the pier sank, and only when a group of black marketeers took up residence did it transform into a black port, a lawless place under the noses of the French Channel Fleet. It even became a secret resupply point for British naval scouts. The nimble and slender VI-class ships could easily navigate the narrow channels outside the harbor, and the black marketeers within regarded the generous British soldiers as top business partners. The intelligence spies gathered from them was often far more accurate than that gathered by the scouts themselves. It was for this reason that Hurlot of Cherbourg openly obtained Royal Navy charts, which Lorraine learned of, and this precipitated the Atis Belle's voyage to Cherbourg. Approaching the reef, Lorraine furled the square sail and focused on the steering wheel. The Atis Belle's slightly plump hull slid into the channel formed by buoys, gracefully and slowly turning a sharp S-bend, following the rising tide, slowly moored to the pier, dropped anchor, and docked. The bow of the boat gently touched the embankment, and just as it came to rest, Lorraine heard a loud bang. Lake swept past Lorraine like a fat, fishy gust of wind, leaping off the boat like a rabbit. Ugh, the sound shook the harbor. The busy people on the dock looked over curiously, as if they were watching some kind of spectacle. Lorraine scratched his head awkwardly, glanced at the stern, and decided to go to the harbor to hire 2 men to clean up the mess. He whistled, shouldered his backpack, and lazily disembarked. This was Lorraine's first time truly setting foot on the land of Black Harbor. Unlike any other port, every inch of Black Harbor blazed with chaos and desolation. Mansions lay beside ruins, and beside them were dumps. From time to time, piles of garbage piled up on the roadside, rotten wood, broken bricks, furniture, and even people living on top of these piles. Casinos, taverns, and brothels dotted the streets, while various shacks had encroached, turning the straight roads into winding alleys. The harbor's actual alleys were filled with another kind of abandonment. All sorts of household garbage rotted between the houses, unattended, the stench permeating the air. Everywhere you looked, there were people, drunks, drunkards, drunkards, drunkards. Sober people rarely appeared on the streets. If they did, they were either gamblers stripped naked or prostitutes who had taken to undressing and offering their smiles. Lorraine was at a loss as to where to find the dock workers. He wandered aimlessly, looking around in bewilderment. Finally, in the alley off a tavern, he spotted someone sober. It must have been a young girl. She was covered in a linen smock so filthy it barely showed its original color. Her long, slender fingers peeked out from the hem, coffee-colored yet surprisingly clean. She rummaged through the stinking garbage, soon unearthing a few pieces of fairly fresh cod. Just as she was about to stuff them into her mouth, she felt someone watching her. She raised her head warily, revealing her face to Lorraine, who was a few steps away. Black hair, green pupils, large eyes. Her skin was indeed brown, and the short, dense black hair that peeked out from beneath her hood was fine and dense. Though her pointed chin suggested thinness, her complexion was not sickly, but rather tinged with a healthy, clean glow. A North African angel from the garbage dump? Lorraine chuckled at his sudden thought, but as soon as he laughed, the girl's body tensed up, teeth bared, eyes glaring, and she stood on all fours in a strange position, protecting the cod in front of her. Like a frightened stray cat. Am I that scary? Lorraine felt strange and embarrassed, and instinctively wanted to touch his nose. As soon as he raised his hand, the girl's body relaxed again. Her thighs slightly bent, her upper body lowered, her whole body poised for attack. Her large eyes narrowed, a menacing glare flashing from her emerald green pupils. I wasn't going to attack you. Lorraine was startled and quickly opened her hands, slowly squatting down, lowering the bag. He spoke slowly and clearly. I have no ill intentions. Look, I have no weapons, and the sword at my waist is in its sheath. I'm very honest. He showed the girl his palms, and to show his sincerity, he rolled up his sleeve slowly and steadily, exposing his arms. The girl probably sensed Lorraine's sincerity, and tentatively picked up the cod, then hid her hands in her smock. She breathed a sigh of relief and asked in a hoarse, slightly gritty voice, "Why are you laughing?" "I just thought of something funny." Lorraine shrugged apologetically. "If I made you misunderstand, I'm willing to apologize, really." She was a little unconvinced. "It's not because of the fish. Oh, if I'm not on the boat, I rarely eat fish." "Then what do you eat?" the girl asked doubtfully. "Most of the time, I eat bread." Lorraine slowly untied the leather bag, revealing the brick-shaped black bread inside. "Have you ever eaten bread?" "Yes." The girl took a step closer like a cat, stretched her neck to take a look, and added, "I ate it not long ago. Do you want to eat more?" The girl quickly retracted her fingers, digging deep into the garbage, her face full of vigilance. Lorraine couldn't help but laugh bitterly. She broke off half a piece of bread with force and put it on the ground. Then she stood up and backed away, all the way to the alley. "I don't mean anything else, I just want to ask you something." The girl stared at Lorraine motionlessly and asked, "What do you want?" "Are you familiar with Black Harbor?" "Part of it. I want to know where I can find an experienced cleaner." Lorraine looked into her eyes. "My ship needs cleaning, and maybe some cargo needs to be moved." The girl frowned and thought for a moment. "Next to the White Ruins is old Hans's Tavern. He has the most capable workers in Black Harbor. They're a bit pricey, but they're honest and clean." With that, she quickly picked up the bread from the ground, turned around, and with a few leaps, ran into the alley, disappearing in the blink of an eye. "You're leaving right now? At least tell me where the White Ruins are." Lorraine slumped over, shouldering the leather bag and sauntering out of the alley, resting her head on her arm. Tisk. Weird woman, rolling around begging for money. My old waist. Chapter 9 Noble. An hour later, Lorraine returned to the dock with 2 hard-working and strong workers, and saw a magical scene. Lake was standing on the deck in high spirits, chatting and laughing with 3 well-dressed gentlemen. There were more than 10 dock workers on and off the boat who were busy unloading goods. Their movements were standardized and efficient. A group of people lined up in a long row, like an assembly line, taking out the vegetables from the bottom hold, transporting them off the ship, and sending them to the large carriage parked on the side, and stacking them neatly into the carriage. Lorraine squeezed onto the boat with a head full of question marks, and walked to Lake with the workers he hired. Sir, this is little Lorraine, let me introduce you. Lake laughed and dragged Lorraine into the circle of people. Mr. Martin, Mr. Thomas and Mr. Pete. They are generous local businessmen who have just bought our entire ship's cargo. Lorraine saluted the 3 gentlemen one by one, exchanged a few polite words, apologized, and pulled Lake aside. Sir, you mean just now? Oh, Lake's face flushed slightly. I just got off the boat. Mr. Pete happened to be nearby. Then what? He apologized for the driver's mockery of me and invited me to his restaurant. I heard he was in the catering business, so I tried to tell him that our ship was loaded with fresh vegetables, and he ate them all. Our cargo was a bit much for him, Lake corrected Lorraine seriously, so he contacted his friends. Mr. Martin runs a tavern, and Mr. Thomas is a loan shark, Lorraine said in disbelief. They even borrowed from loan sharks to buy vegetables. What are you talking about? Lake hurriedly dragged Lorraine further away. Mr. Thomas has more than 30 thugs and needs food too. He's the buyer, a boatload of vegetables, 3 buyers. Lake, despite being seasick, sold the goods for a high price of £36, and the money and goods were paid. Considering that the cost of this shipload of goods was less than £28, Lake had lost nearly 30% of the profit. This money is too easy to make. Lorraine looked at Lake with a complicated expression. Sir, you may be a natural businessman. Really? Lake liked this compliment very much. Little Lorraine, what were you doing just now? I went to find some people to clean up the traces of your spellcasting along the way. Unfortunately, as a devout Protestant, Lake denied his relationship with witchcraft. In his opinion, Mr. Pete was his first benefactor in Black Harbor. Not only did he buy all the food from the Addis Chamber of Commerce, he also introduced him to the second benefactor, Mr. Thomas, the loan shark. Lake heard from Mr. Thomas that a black market merchant was selling a batch of porcelain from the East recently. The quality was high and the price was low. This coincided with the information Lake bought from the broker. He was so excited that he immediately left Lorraine to watch the ship and enthusiastically got into Mr. Thomas's carriage and entered the harbor, intending to take advantage of this evil wind to buy fine oriental porcelain from the black marketeer named Old Barry and return to Plymouth to make a fortune. Lorraine could only smile bitterly. And so, night fell. The ship's cargo was emptied. Mr. Martin and Mr. Pitt and their workers had left with a full load. Lorraine's hired workers had also completed their work, leaving the newly cleaned stern cabin immaculate and spotless. The fragrance of the sea was everywhere, and there was no trace of any strange odor. Lorraine was very satisfied with the cleaning results. He readily paid each man a shilling for his work, then rolled up the planks and sat bored on the deck, staring blankly at the clear sky. The dock was quiet at night. The harbor was devoid of the daytime vitality. Only a few lights remained on the moored ships. There was silence everywhere, and no one was around. Everyone had fled to the harbor. There was solid land, alluring women, and spicy liquor, each of which was a demon that could make a sailor sell his soul. They would never be willing to board the ship and leave the port without spending their last penny. Lorraine suddenly missed the air. With Sir Leighton there, he never had to worry about having no outlet for his exuberant energy, unlike now. He actually wanted to tie the knot again. Was he crazy? He had just tied it 2 hours ago. He stood up irritably, took a few big steps onto the sail net, and climbed all the way to the high observation tower. At an altitude of 22 meters, the moon in the sky was within reach, and only then did Lorraine feel a sense of calm. How strange! He stretched out his palm and made a circle, circling the brightly lit harbor area not far away, frowning in thought. Since returning to the sea again, his energy has become unusually strong. For the past 3 days, he'd been single-handedly manning the Atis Beauty, with a standard crew of 8, while also tending to Lake, a landlubber. He'd slept less than 2 hours a day, yet never felt a slump in energy. Today had been a smooth sail, but arriving at Black Harbor, with nothing to do, he grew restless in the dead of night. Something was burning within him, something threatening to burst forth. Was he ill? Or perhaps just too impatient? As he pondered this, Lorraine saw 3 carriages pull out of the harbor. Atop the shaft of the lead carriage sat the portly Lake, waving excitedly from afar. "Little Lorraine. Lower the planks. Open the hold. We're going to make a fortune. We're going to make a fortune." Standing side by side with Lake on the poop deck, Lorraine watched as 7 or 8 burly men clumsily moved about the ship, carrying bags of spices into the hold. He felt a mixture of doubt and alarm. The spices were Lake's prize. He had gone with Mr. Thomas to Old Barry's warehouse to discuss business, intending to select a suitably priced set of Oriental porcelain to return to Plymouth and make a killing. Lorraine had never imagined Lake could make a killing. Although he couldn't tell if porcelain was genuine or ancient, Lorraine knew the intricacies of the porcelain trade better than 99% of Europeans. Blue and white porcelain, cloisonné porcelain, Zheng porcelain, Dingjiao porcelain, Daoke porcelain. Porcelain was a work of art, its value never measured by weight. Lake was just a qualified leatherworker. What could he possibly know? The best outcome of his trip was finding a tea set beloved by England's upper class. Because tea sets were both luxury goods and daily necessities, as long as they looked good, they wouldn't lose money anyway. But who could have known that Lake would actually find 3 full carts of spices, nearly 500 kilograms. Things suddenly became bizarre. Lorraine subconsciously touched the sword on his waist and asked in a low voice, "Sir, don't you think that things went too smoothly today? It's all God blessing us." Lake made the sign of the cross on his chest with gratitude. "Little Lorraine, more than 400 kilograms of spices. Even if they are just inferior goods soaked in seawater, we can easily sell them for £100 when we ship them back to Plymouth. That's a profit of more than 205%. That's the problem, isn't it?" Lorraine frowned deeply. Spices are not as easy to trace as porcelain. If it can be sold for £100, why would Old Barry sell it for £40? He has no ship, can't we just sell it to the French? Lorraine pressed. These are spices, a hot commodity that is in short supply throughout Europe. This, Lake finally became alert, but still couldn't avoid luck. "Little Lorraine, Mr. Barry is a black market businessman, and he specializes in supplying and marketing pirates. I guess he should be a wanted criminal. Once he leaves the Blackport, he will have to go to jail. You've even considered he's a wanted criminal, yet you still dare to do business with him. This is a Blackport?" Lorraine felt threatened. Dunninger said that when profits reach 10%, merchants will be tempted to act. When profits reach 50%, merchants will take risks. When profits reach 100%, they will dare to trample on all human laws. And when profits reach 300%, they will dare to risk being hanged. Lake has clearly gone beyond taking risks, while Old Barry seems a little too rational. "Sir, I think, 2 distinguished gentlemen." A humble greeting suddenly came from behind his ear, and Lorraine was horrified. He subconsciously protected Lake behind him, his hand tightly gripping the hilt of his sword. He turned around and saw that the person speaking was the leader of the spice workers. He seemed a little frightened by Lorraine's reaction and took a half step back, cautious and alert. "Sir, I'm a worker under Mr. Barry." "Look, we know who you are." Lorraine narrowed his eyes and interrupted him. "Excuse me, are you done with your work? Why do I see more than half of the spices still on the carriage, but you're just hanging around in front of us?" The leader swallowed his saliva, looked past Lorraine, and looked at Lake sincerely. "Sir, there's too much cargo, and the workers have worked hard all day. Can you ask the people on the ship to help? We're willing to share the appropriate remuneration." Lake shook his head apologetically. "I'm sorry, there's only little Lorraine and I on this ship, no other sailors." "Really?" The leader took a few steps back, and even his voice became low. His voice and his response made the scene suddenly tense. Lorraine drew out his sword with a clang, and despite Lake's objections, he pushed him to the stern, leaving him with no way to retreat. Lake was struggling and nervous, and he had to pay attention to his most precious reputation. He kept muttering to himself all the way, "This is very rude. A well-educated person should not be questioned." "Sir, that's enough." Lorraine drew his sword, lowered his shoulders, and focused his mind. "He doesn't care whether you are lying or not. He just wants to know if there are any of our people on the ship." "Huh?" The leader in the shadows laughed. "What a smart boy, and very brave." He paused. and 7 or 8 knife-wielding men walked out from behind him and formed a line. They were all spice workers from earlier. The leader took the scimitar from one of them, swung it twice, and looked at Lorraine with a sinister smile. A kid who doesn't know how to live or die, met a very stupid master. No wonder you dared to do business with the merchants in Black Harbor without the consent of the Black Harbor Committee. What are you going to do? Lake was incoherent in fear. Mr. Barry. Mr. Barry, your friend Mr. Pete went bankrupt. In order to prevent his beautiful wife and daughter from falling into prostitution, he mortgaged you and your ship to the creditor, Mr. Thomas, the leader explained with a smile. Mr. Martin of the committee is a witness who proves that you have traded in Black Harbor without the permission of the committee. In this way, you have lost the protection of Black Harbor's laws. Mr. Thomas sold you to Mr. Barry. It was not expensive, £100 including the people and the ship, which is just enough to pay off Mr. Pitt's debt and the remuneration required by Mr. Martin. Therefore, on behalf of Mr. Barry, I declare that you and your property will belong to the Barry Chamber of Commerce from this moment on. The leader raised his knife and said word by word, accept your fate, British. Those who obey will prosper, and those who resist will perish. P.S. The comment on profit is the view of the British critic Dunninger in Trade Unions and Strikes. Marx quoted it, and it was basically the original quotation. Chapter 10 Checkout. With helpers familiar with the area, Lorraine could no longer resist the urge to save him. Even if Lake's foolish knife had made it difficult for him to walk, even if he was now unarmed and without even clothes. Saving someone was like putting out a fire. He had already been unconscious for 2 days. If he delayed any longer, Lake would be dead. The midday sun was blazing. Lorraine dragged himself down the hill, supported by Henna, into the harbor and into a grimy alley. He waited against the wall. After counting to 47, Henna, wearing a dirty overall, tossed in a drunken corpse. He wore a dirty blue and white striped sweatshirt, baggy blue trousers, and a blue turban. Lorraine pouted, I don't like blue, this is land. You won't mix with the sea, seems, that makes some sense. The two stripped the sailor down, and soon Lorraine was a typical down-and-out sailor, staggering down the street, looking hungover. The two parted ways. Lorraine walked down the long street and found the sign for grass-fried foie gras near the ruins of a reclining oak tree. Business was slow, even though it was lunchtime, there wasn't a single customer. He gently pushed open the swinging door, chose the first seat on the left, and rang the bell at the table. Ling. Ling. Mr. Peter, dazed behind the counter, was surprised and surprised. He strode to the kitchen and soon rushed out a blonde woman in her 30s, a pretty woman. She was wearing a maid's outfit that was cut to cover only her private parts, and she moved hesitantly and reluctantly. Sir, our specialty today is butter-fried goose liver and lettuce salad. The goose liver is very fresh, thick and juicy. At this point, she paused for a moment, struggling to squeeze out a charming smile. Just like me, I don't like goose liver, that is too old. The woman's face changed immediately. Sir, please pay attention, given the way you are dressed. I don't think I need to be careful with my words. Lorraine flipped through the menu casually without raising his eyelids. A salad and a glass of Bordeaux. Please dress a little more when you serve the dishes, thank you. Amidst the endless quarrels and complaints from the kitchen, the salad and red wine were soon brought to Lorraine by the newly dressed waitress. Lorraine picked up her fork and took a small bite. She smiled and said, as my friend told me, you have the freshest lettuce in Black Harbor. Yes, sir. The waitress perked up. Our lettuce is picked from Plymouth, shipped through a special shipping channel, and it's fresh the next day. Really? Lorraine took another small bite, pursing her lips with a look of enjoyment. Fresh vegetables are always a sailor's best friend. Madam, may I thank the chef in person? For a restaurant on the verge of bankruptcy, thanking the chef in person would greatly enhance their reputation and spread word of mouth. It was an invitation Mr. Pete couldn't refuse. Mr. Pete, wearing a chef's hat, quickly stood in front of Lorraine's table, his eyes smiling and his attitude serious. Sir, I heard from Caroline that you'd like to offer valuable feedback on our salads. I guess so, Lorraine continued, chewing on his salad. Ms. Caroline. I'd better call you Mrs. Pitt. It's more polite. Mr. Pitt looked startled. Why, it's not important. Lorraine took a sip of his wine, pushed his plate aside, and crossed his fingers. Ms. Pitt just said your lettuce is fresh from the day before. But from what I understand, due to the wind, it took 4 days to get to Black Harbor. It should have been 6, He raised his head and grinned at Mr. Pitt. My captain told me that credibility is the foundation of a merchant, and fraud will bankrupt you. Pitt finally recognized Lorraine. His pupils shrank to pinpoints, and he asked in a trembling voice, You're the one, Atis Chamber of Commerce. Lorraine Drake sends his greetings. Aren't you dead? I heard rumors say, seeing is believing. Lorraine pointed at Pitt's eyes and slowly made a scratching motion. Pitt was terrified. He retreated in terror, dragging Caroline with him, wanting to bite. But Caroline said, if I were you, I wouldn't dare abandon my daughter in front of this mob. Peter and Caroline, who had already reached the door, froze. He mechanically turned his head, glaring at Caroline's back. What are you trying to do? For now, I just want to taste some lettuce from my hometown and try some French red wine. It's not very good. Lorraine glanced at the clock on the counter and said slowly, I heard your daughter likes to play the piano on the second floor every evening at 6 o'clock. It's only 1 o'clock now. I sincerely hope she misread the time today. He had barely finished speaking when the melodious sound of piano music suddenly rang out from the second floor. The tune was G.B. Martini's famous A Joy of Love, but the pianist's notes were a little rushed, and the melody lacked much joy. But it was enough. Lorraine smiled and gestured for invitation. May I invite you and your wife to join us? Although it's delicious food, there is always a time to pay the bill. More than an hour later, Lorraine changed into a decent new shirt, with a slender rapier on his waist, and drove out of the restaurant's back door in a carriage with Henna. Henna drove with a frown. Why didn't you kill them? Why would I kill them? They might inform Thomas and old Barry. No. Lorraine leaned lazily against the carriage, playing with a pocket of jingling gold pounds. They're not friends, not even partners. Pete didn't gain much from the plot against the captain. In a sense, he was forced into it. Do you think he's innocent? There's no doubt he's the culprit, at least one of them. Lorraine smiled playfully. But for a businessman who's been suffering from bankruptcy for a long time, making him truly bankrupt is far more cruel than killing him. Killing is a good way to solve a problem, but it's not necessarily a good way to get revenge. So you robbed him of everything and made him sign an IOU for £100 that he couldn't cash. Was that all revenge? £47, 16 shillings and 3 pence was the money he paid the captain for vegetables, and that IOU was the revenge. By the way, do you have any business acquaintances? I can transfer the IOU to someone for just £5. £5 in exchange for 3 white slaves and a substantial property, a deal that required no skill. Henna effortlessly transferred the IOU to old Hansa. To express his gratitude, Hansa allowed them to stay in the tavern's private room until late. Not only did they enjoy a free dinner, but they also bought a bottle of excellent wound medicine and some small items Henna needed for £3. The cool, special ointment soothed Lorraine's wounds in just one afternoon. While he still couldn't exert much strength, he was at least more agile and appeared to be no less capable than a normal person. This was crucial to Lorraine. They were next headed to old Barry's warehouse. Unlike Pete, Barry had 10 thugs. 10 thugs, Lorraine muttered, shaking her head. He only sent 8 when he robbed the ship. I didn't expect, our Mr. Barry was such a cautious man. This is just asking for trouble. P.S. G.B. Martini, a brilliant 18th century composer and musician, was Mozart's mentor and friend. Incidentally, in 1776, Mozart was not as famous as he is now. Chapter 11, Ghost in the Water. Unlike the bustling central harbor, the coastal harbor, home to the Black Harbor warehouses, was as quiet as the docks at night. The residents of the harbor were either wandering around the central harbor or holed up in their warehouses, reluctant to venture out. This made Lorraine's actions considerably easier. After learning the location of old Barry's warehouse from Peter, and after a field trip in confirmation with old Hansa, Lorraine and Henna, working through a simple sketch, agreed on their next course of action. Shortly after nightfall, Peter's carriage slowly entered the docks, stopping near the coastal harbor. The two split up again. Lorraine stood alone on the shore, gazing up at the scattered lights of the harbor 2 miles away, and then leaped into the sea. The coastal harbor is the oldest and best preserved built area in all of Black Harbor. Centuries ago, when Black Harbor was still Cherbourg, this area served as a French naval base. In addition to deeper and wider mooring piers, the French also built more than a dozen spacious dry and wet docks along the coast. After a later renovation, it has become the best watergate warehouse in Black Harbor. A watergate warehouse is a special type of warehouse, generally divided into 3 connected warehouses, front, middle, and back. The front warehouse is the largest, with a wide water gate facing the sea. The warehouse is equipped with at least 2 covered mooring ways, which were once wet docks. The middle warehouse is slightly narrower but taller. In the center is the former dry dock. Merchants filled in the lower dam and converted it into a pure warehouse. Because of the high roof of the warehouse, there are 2 large rows of hanging rooms along the warehouse wall, which are generally used as workers' dormitories. The back warehouse is the smallest warehouse. It was once the residence of ship workers and seamen. After renovation, it now serves as the mansion for the boss and core members of the Chamber of Commerce. Lorraine opened his eyes underwater. A transparent layer of double eyelids covered his eyeballs. At first glance, it was not visible, but it was tough and dense, protecting his eyes from the salty water and floating debris near the harbor, allowing him to see freely underwater. A myriad of sounds drifted through the water. Merchant ships entering the harbor a few miles away plowed through the water, gentle waves lapped against the shore, and men fished on the shore, seemingly invisible, talking to no one. Every sound was distinct, allowing him to determine direction and approximate distance. His whaler blood brought him benefits beyond sonar. His breathing became long and deep, allowing him to remain underwater for minutes without feeling any sluggishness. His swimming strokes resembled a fish's, a flick of his legs sending him gliding meters. In just a few breaths, he had reached the coastal harbor area and silently approached the number 3 water tank. Meanwhile, Henna, shedding her oversized overalls and heavy leather boots, scaled the tank roof like a cat. Riding the night wind, she sprinted forward, leaping through the deserted streets. Landing on all fours, her knees and elbows slightly bent, she landed gently and steadily on the high, protruding roof of the middle tank, encountering a wandering stray cat. Meow, the wild cat tilted its head, as if curious about why its fellow creature was so large and so completely different from it. Henna straightened up and glanced at the cat. Meow, like a fish, Lorraine slipped through the underwater barriers blocking the boats and into the sluice gate. This was the foreshore, built mostly out to sea, with depths ranging from shallow to deep, reaching nearly 8 meters at its deepest point. At this depth, human vision could no longer penetrate the barrier of seawater. The surface and the bottom became 2 relatively independent worlds. Lorraine straightened up underwater, passing through the leisurely swimming fish, and saw 8 rows of wooden stakes arranged like guards. They formed 2 rows, each with a distance of 14 or 15 meters between them. This indicated that Old Barry's warehouse had 3 internal berths, 2 of which were occupied by boats. The middle berth held a small fishing boat, no more than 5 meters long, while the left berth housed a larger vessel with a draft of nearly 4 meters. The keel was curved, and the hull was slightly plump. Lorraine floated close to the keel and found traces of internal reinforcement on the planking near the central rudder. This was the reinforcement he had personally made for the Atis Beauty before leaving Plymouth. Lorraine closed his eyes and continued to rise, tucked against the central rudder. He emerged halfway from the stern, barely showing his nose, breathing softly. He quickly dove again, reaching the deepest point between the 2 left center dock planks. He then floated flat between the wooden piles, less than 30 centimeters from the surface. There were people in the hold. 2 men were scattered around the outer hold, one at the bow of the Atis Beauty, the other on the furthest plank from him. Both were fishing, silent and silent. 2 thick fishing lines hung quietly, their moon-white buoys bobbing on the surface, gently swaying with the waves. Lorraine thought for a moment, then dove deeper, retrieved the nearest hook, and carefully slid it around the wooden pile twice before hooking it back onto his leather boot. Once he had done this, he began to approach the angler. The line ran out, the buoy suddenly sank, and the coil began to spin wildly. The bell tied to the coil jingled furiously, startling the dozing angler awake. He gripped his rod tightly and rose to reel in his line. The sharp hook instantly ripped through the leather of his boot, barely catching a sliver of it. The hook swung backwards through the seawater, then sank into the wooden stake with a thud, unable to budge. The rod bent into half-moon shape. The fisherman, excited, struggled to hold on to the rod and coil, shouting to his distant companions, "Al! Big fish! Big fish, oh my God! Pero, did you catch a shark?" Al exclaimed, rushing to help. Pero glanced triumphantly at his feet when he suddenly saw a white mass, right in the middle of the dark shadow. "Huh? What's this?" A massive hand reached out from the water, grasped Pero's ankle with lightning speed, and yanked with all its might. Pero cried out in shock, falling into the water, his head slamming against the edge of the boardwalk, and he fainted for a moment. In a split second, Lorraine grabbed his neck and dragged him all the way to the bottom, hooking his waistband onto the anchor point of the beauty. Perrault's eyes bulged as he frantically danced, his movements growing slower and softer. Al, on the shore, was stunned by the sudden change. It seemed to him that Perrault had been dragged under by a giant fish. The thud must have been caused by the injury he sustained during the fall, and the red spots on the surface of the water proved that the fall had been severe. But he couldn't see Perrault. Visibility in the water was only 2 or 3 meters, and bubbles swirled everywhere. Even with his best eyesight, he couldn't find Perrault. It had been over a minute. Seeing the bubbles dwindling, Al gritted his teeth, strained his eyes, and dove in. Underwater was a whole other world. Wooden piles, the bottom of the boat, silence everywhere. He saw Perrault, his limbs stretched out, his mouth wide open, dangling on the anchor of the ship, only twitching occasionally and spitting out a few bubbles from his mouth. What the hell? Al quickly water-skied to save him, and when he dived to the bottom of the water, he suddenly felt someone grabbing his waist. Puff! The sharp rapier pierced his throat from behind, and the tip of the sword retracted like lightning. A large amount of dirty blood flowed out of the wound, mixed with long strings of bubbles and floated to the surface. Al turned around, covering his neck in despair. He saw a slender figure in a white shirt raise his head and float up gracefully. After a while, he jumped out of the water and disappeared completely from his sight. He exhaled the last bubble in his lungs. Head. There's a ghost in the water. That sailor, he is back. Chapter 12. Why keep someone alive? Hannah secured the sling to the fireplace chimney and descended lightly along the wall. High in the middle warehouse stood a row of shuttered windows, 6 panels on each side, corresponding to the warehouse's hanging towers. Some served as dormitories for the thugs and workers, while others housed a haphazard collection of miscellaneous items. Hannah listened quietly against the shutters, quickly identifying breathing sounds from 3 of them on one side. She pulled a wooden clip from her pocket to clamp her nose, then from another pocket pulled a tinder and some damp tobacco. Thick white smoke quickly drifted from the ignited tobacco. Hannah watched breathlessly for a moment before casually stuffing the pieces into the gaps between the shutters. The sling, tobacco, and this old, windproof tinder, along with the medicine, had all been purchased from old Hansa. As a tavern owner and human trafficker in Black Harbor, he possessed a wealth of rare and unusual items. Just like these tobaccos, native to the New World and steeped in datura syrup imported from India, their smoke possesses a potent hallucinogenic effect, yet unlike the overly addictive properties of opium, making it a favorite among the rabble-rousing population of Black Harbor. The assassins also favored datura. From ancient times, they had used this odorless, special hallucinogen as a distraction, allowing them to break into homes with unparalleled success. Hina finished one side of the warehouse, barefooted, and returned to the rooftop, circling around to the other side to repeat the same trick. When she finished both sides, she circled back, pulled out a knife, pried open the shutters in the utility room, and vaulted inside. A strange stench permeated the utility room, like stinky socks, or organic matter rotting in a corner, long neglected. She ignored it, skirting the cluttered tables and chairs, then several overflowing laundry baskets, and leaning against the door to listen quietly. The hallway was quiet, but the breathing in the dormitories on either side was much heavier. She gently opened the door and glanced through the crack below. A dozen sealed wooden crates lay stacked in a corner of the warehouse. No one was seen in the hallways leading to either side of the escalator, nor downstairs. Both the main door leading to the front warehouse and the small door to the back were tightly shut. Hannah glided out of the room, unsheathed the knife from her thigh, and with a flourish, pried open one of the bedrooms. The thug's bedroom was even more chaotic than the utility room. Hannah walked directly to the bed, glanced at the muscular man lying there, his face flushed, and then drew her knife. The sharp knife sliced into the inside of his neck, severing his trachea, blood vessels, esophagus, and vocal cords, then swiftly withdrew. Warm blood spurted from the wound, splattering the wall. The thug twitched unconsciously, a strange gurgling sound emanating from his throat, and soon fell silent. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. From the 2 hanging towers, Hannah, with her graceful cat-like steps, slowly and carefully harvested 6 lives. Then, she wiped her knife clean, removed the wooden clip from her nose, and locked the small door to the back warehouse. After confirming she hadn't missed anyone, she opened the door to the front warehouse. With a creak, the door swung open. Lorraine, wet and panting, lowered her head. Seeing Henna open the door, she smiled brightly. How many? 6, Henna frowned, staring at Lorraine's chest. Your wound has burst open, it's a penetrating wound. Any movement will leave some marks. No need to make a fuss, Lorraine, holding onto the door, passed Henna. Where are the survivors? No, Lorraine was stunned. You left no survivors, why? Henna asked confidently. Why did they leave them alive? 8 of the 10 thugs had appeared from the front and middle warehouses. Theoretically, there should have been 2 left in the back warehouse with Old Barry. This is the state of affairs tonight when there are no visitors. Before entering, Lorraine and Henna checked the area, and the known information was that there were 2 guards at the back warehouse gate and 2 carriages parked side by side at the door. How many carriages did Old Barry have? Was the man guarding the door Old Barry's last thug? There was no way to tell. Lorraine stood behind the small door of the middle warehouse for a long time, gently pulled out the latch of the lock, and went up to the hanging tower with Henna and hid in the utility room. At Lorraine's request, Henna climbed up to the roof of the warehouse again, and about half an hour later, she brought new news. Old Barry was not asleep, and was chatting with another man in the room. There were still 2 people guarding the warehouse door, and there were still 2 carriages outside the door. In other words, Old Barry had visitors tonight, which was bad news. Lorraine concentrated on thinking. Henna, how many cigarettes do you have left? 6. How many do you need to inhale to cause hallucinations? If it's just affecting movement, not much. Henna pried open the door and glanced at the tightly closed small door. If you want to knock someone out, it'll take a little longer. If that's the case, Lorraine forced herself to stretch, enduring the pain. I need you to go to the back warehouse and persuade Mr. Barry to leave his property. Bidding farewell to Henna, Lorraine set to work. The boxes in the middle warehouse contained hay, a small amount of porcelain, and some tinware, all specialties from the East. He selected 4 boxes, unloaded the goods, tossed in the cigarettes, and arranged them in a circle around the small door. After arranging the boxes, he slid to one side of the small door, leaned against the wall, and, imitating Henna's example, pinched his nose and held his breath to ignite the hay. The wooden boxes quickly caught fire, and the white smoke from the cigarettes, wrapped in thick black smoke, obscured Lorraine and drifted through the crack in the door into the back warehouse. Lorraine heard a commotion in the back warehouse, some people shouting fire and some shouting vague names. The chaotic shouting was getting closer and closer. Someone kicked the door open and threw in a bucket of water. The water thrown randomly could not put out the fire, it only made the black smoke thicker. Someone cursed a few words outside, and then 5 or 6 big men carrying buckets and basins squeezed into the middle warehouse, mumbling and staring blankly at several wooden boxes that were burning fiercely. A flash of cold light pierced through the black smoke, piercing a big man's heart, then pulled it out, turned around and stabbed another big man's neck. The wooden basin and barrel fell to the ground with a clang, and the 2 big men fell softly. Lorraine threw away his sword, and with his hand, he drew the scimitar on the big man's waist, and with a muffled groan, he chopped the 2 men in a row. The excessive movement caused his wound to split, and the blood that squeezed out seeped through the bandage and stained his shirt red. But Lorraine killed 4 people in an instant. He swung his scimitar, aiming for the 5th man, but he was caught off guard, deflecting Lorraine's blow with a clang. Boy, it's you. Lorraine's movement dispersed the smoke that had gathered near the small door, allowing the other man to see Lorraine's face clearly, and Lorraine could see him clearly too. It was the leader from that day. Lorraine gave him a long look, then slowly stepped back out of the smoke, taking a deep breath. "Atis Chamber of Commerce, Lorraine Drake greets you, sir." The leader kicked over the wooden box in front of him, grinning grimly as he led the other survivor out of the smoke zone and stood across from Lorraine. "Interesting little trick. I told you you're being reckless, and it seems I was right." Lorraine nodded with a smile, but didn't say anything back. The kick overturned the burning hay, and the black smoke faded into a hazy mass, filling half the warehouse. No one knew where the toxic fumes from the mandrake had mingled. Lorraine breathed heavily, figuring it was best to inhale less. The chief mistook his reaction for youthful arrogance. "Judging from your wounds, your captain was ruthless, but unfortunately, his stab wasn't accurate enough." As he spoke, the chief swung his sword, bent his waist and lowered his shoulders, assuming a fighting stance. Why die for such a captain? Isn't living better? New book, please vote. Sincerely, please vote. Chapter 13. You owe an apology. A faint black smoke filled the warehouse. Within the smoke, the leader attacked, Lorraine defended. The scimitar wielded the leader with great force, each blow carrying immense power. Clang. Lorraine blocked the leader's blow, pursed his lips, and staggered back 3 steps. The leader caught up, raised his knife and slashed again. Lorraine dodged with a sidestep and turned. He braced his shoulder against the leader's body, swung around behind him, raised his arm, and launched his scimitar. With a thug's puff, the blade pierced the onlooker's chest with pinpoint accuracy, piercing through all the way to the handle. The thug stared in disbelief at the blood splattering from his chest, then slowly fell to his knees. "You're looking for death?" The leader was furious that Lorraine had managed to sneak up on him during the fight. He seized Lorraine's moment to catch his breath, grabbed him by the shirt, and swung his knife, slashing across. Unarmed, Lorraine ducked into the leader's arms and delivered a powerful punch to the diaphragm between his chest and abdomen. Bang! The leader gasped in pain and tried to draw his knife back, but Lorraine suddenly straightened up and rammed his head into his jaw. Another loud bang. This time, both were injured. Lorraine's forehead ached, and the leader's vision went black. They both stumbled back, took 2 steps back, and then kicked out simultaneously, striking each other in the chest. Bang! Bang! Lorraine was kicked straight back and rolled 3 times on the ground. The wound had completely opened, and blood soaked through his chest and back, almost staining his shirt. But he held his breath and said nothing, even though his lungs had long since given up after the blow. The leader gasped for air on the other side. He felt a sharp pain in his chest, abdomen, and jaw. He suspected a rib had been broken by the blow, his teeth loosened, and half his face was numb. He wasn't sure if his jaw was actually broken. Tough kid, he gritted out, watching helplessly as a blood-soaked Lorraine rose to his feet, seemingly invincible. He shakily wrenched his rapier from the body of the dead thug, flicking his arm to sweep away the blood. The leader suddenly noticed something strange about Lorraine's nose. A small wooden clamp, wrapped in cotton, was stuck between his nostrils. Why the nostrils? The leader instinctively wanted to ask, but as soon as he took a breath, he felt a wave of dizziness. In this smoke, Lorraine started silently. 1 step, 2 leaps. With his eyes bare, he lunged, halting abruptly. He pressed his wrist downward, raised his sword, and thrust. The slender blade surged forward like a serpent, slowly, towards his heart. Terrified, the leader stepped back, his sword drawn to protect himself. The rapier swung upwards, a long hissing sound scattering sparks from the broad blade. Lorraine took another giant step forward, thrusting with a perfect lunge. With a puff, the blade pierced the leader's right shoulder, passing through the shoulder blade. A moment's eye contact marked the outcome. Lorraine shook his hand, unsheathing the rapier, ducking sideways to avoid a splatter of blood. He spun behind the leader, his rapier raised high and slashing downward, slicing the leader's right knee. Only then did the leader let out a scream, his long sword falling from his grasp, and he fell to one knee. "You won?" Lorraine stood still, his head bowed. The tip of his sword pressed against the leader's back, taking his first breath of the burnt air. "You have 1 chance to live now. Tell me where the captain is." The leader grinned fiercely. "Do you think I'll believe you?" "No." Puff. The rapier pierced the chest, and the leader collapsed. Lorraine gasped, clutching his chest as he struggled to take a few steps. He struggled all the way to the afterhold, slamming the door shut. At the other end of the afterhold, Hannah was blocking the door, playing with a knife, covered in blood. Behind her lay 4 twitching corpses, and before her stood 2 well-dressed gentlemen, one fat, one thin. Life is full of encounters. "Mr. Thomas, Lorraine Drake, a member of the Atis Beauty, greets you." Lorraine smiled weakly. "Why? Don't you want to introduce me to Mr. Barry?" Old Barry's room, located on the right side of the afterhold, had previously been the dock manager's office. A partition wall divided the warehouse into 3 parts, and Old Barry occupied one part alone. There were 2 floors, upper and lower. All the living were on the upper floor. In Old Barry's bedroom, the 2 gentlemen were tied together elegantly in a flower-like sailor's knot, back to back. Lorraine's skills were second to none among the sailors. The knots were neither too tight to wrinkle the clothes, nor too loose to give the illusion of escape. Lorraine dragged a chair to the end of the bed, crossed his legs, and played with his lost command sword. Hannah was treating his wound. She carefully took off his shirt, untied the bandages, washed off the blood, applied medicine, and replaced them with clean and dry new bandages. The cool feeling made Lorraine breathe a sigh of relief. The slight intoxication from inhaling a small amount of mandrake smoke further blurred the pain and brought him a long-lost comfort. He shook his head slightly. Mr. Thomas and old Barry, who had been keeping an eye on Lorraine, both brightened up and said in unison, "As gentlemen, Mr. Drake, we demand respectful treatment and the right to redeem our freedom. We can discuss this later." After tightening his bandage, Lorraine nodded and thanked Henna. "I'm more interested in some other topics, like, where's my captain?" Old Barry's face showed a look of struggle. "The dungeon, where's the dungeon?" "The basement." Old Barry gritted his teeth. "Out of this room, there's a row of filing cabinets across the street. Push them open and you'll see the basement entrance." "A good start." Lorraine smiled and winked at Henna, who understood and turned to leave. Lorraine crossed his fingers. "Mr. Barry, is this really where you work and live?" "The safe is in the desk drawer. The door is fake, you can remove it." "It's a pleasure to talk to you." Lorraine stood up and clicked off the drawer, revealing a strong iron safe. "What's the combination?" 4159, a rich harvest. In the iron cabinet, Lorraine found 4 bundles of gold pounds tied with rubber bands, each bundle containing 100 gold pounds. In addition, there were the property deeds and land deeds of the number 3 water warehouse, and 2 IOUs with a face value of 60 pounds and 80 pounds respectively. The rest were all navigation supplies, including Lorraine's logbook, a privateering license, the ship deeds of the Atisbel and the small fishing boat, and 3 nautical charts. These 3 nautical charts covered the entire coastal waters of Western Europe. One was Lorraine's improved version of the straight map for military information, and the other 2 were the most detailed hand-painted maps of the North Sea and the Cantabrian Sea published by the French Royal Maritime Bureau in the civilian category. Combined with what Lorraine had discovered before, the spices belonging to Old Barry were neatly lying in the bottom hold of the Atisbel. Lorraine guessed that Old Barry intended to enter the maritime trade circle. He laughed and took out a privateering license and waved it in front of Old Barry. "Mr. Barry, do you recognize it? It's a priceless treasure." Old Barry's face was gloomy. In the past 100 years, the maritime powers in Europe have stopped issuing privateering licenses. If a license from the Kingdom of Britain were to leak out, it could be exchanged for £1,000 from any pirate. £1,000. "You are a cunning businessman, but you don't have enough vision." Lorraine packed up those priceless items and said slowly, "Francis Drake is the founder of the Drake hereditary baron family and the first Lord Drake. When he was a pirate, he made the French, Dutch and Spanish in the New World anxious. After becoming a navy, he led the weak Royal Navy to defeat the Spanish Invincible Armada. He also completed a circumnavigation of the world. The Drake Passage marked the beginning of the decline of Spain and Portugal. This document started the whole legend." Lorraine knocked on the binding of the letter of marque and laughed disdainfully. "If you send it to the Drake family in Tavistock, it's worth £5,000. If you hand it over to any collector in England, it's £10,000, £20,000, and he can take it as he pleases. £20,000. Old Barry and Mr. Thomas shuddered at the same time. "Your last name is also Drake. This document must be yours. In that case, why, what do you want to ask? Why would a noble descendant of aristocracy go to a small boat to be a sailor? Or why didn't I sell it?" Old Barry swallowed his saliva. "Both." Lorraine casually stuffed the letter of marque into his bag. "There is a saying in the East, how can a sparrow understand the ambition of a swan? No matter how clear I explain it, it's a pity that you won't understand it." Old Barry sighed dejectedly. "Mr. Drake, I have handed over everything. We are even. £20,000 of property is more than enough to atone for my sins." Lorraine was about to reply when Hannah creaked open the door and entered, shaking her head slightly at him. Lorraine's face darkened. "You killed him?" A flicker of panic flashed in Old Barry's eyes. "I found a letter of marque on your ship. I thought he could give me more. I asked for it, but he refused, always claiming he was just a leatherworker on his first trip to sea. It was. He forced me to torture him. No matter how hard I tortured him, he wouldn't tell me. I even broke 2 whips." "Mr. Drake." "Mr. Drake?" Drake, gurgling, Old Barry convulsed violently. Lorraine grasped his hair, forcing him to raise his head. With her command knife, she slowly slit his throat. Blood gushed from the gaping wound, not splashing, but like a waterfall, soaking his clothes and the sheets. His eyes began to blurt, his mouth opening and closing unconsciously, spewing more blood, splattering Lorraine. Lorraine narrowed her eyes and let him go, leaving him drooping and twitching on Mr. Thomas's back. Thomas sat upright, his expression solemn. "I understand how you feel," he tried to be dignified and calm. "You are well educated and should know that I don't need to take responsibility for this matter, nor should I be implicated." "I know." Lorraine dragged his sword around the bed. "You just sold Pitt's mortgage to the right person. Now that old Barry is dead, the Pitt family has become white slaves of the Hanseatic League. Perhaps you are willing to provide a suitable ransom to buy back your freedom from me." "Yes," Mr. Thomas cheered up. "I think £1,000 is a suitable price. With just a letter, you can take this money and run away before dawn." £1,000, you are a generous man." Lorraine slowly placed the sword on Mr. Thomas's tailcoat and gently wiped off the blood stain on it. He said softly, "Logically speaking, you don't owe me anything, and you are sincere. According to the education I received since childhood, I should agree. However, I have received a wider and more diverse education. If you do something wrong, you should apologize." He took a breath. "You owe the captain an apology. If you want to tell him in person, you have to go down." Chapter 14. Look out, in turn. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. After executing Thomas, Lorraine allowed Henna to help him down to the dungeon. He stood before the shattered, lifeless lake for a full half hour. Half an hour later, he emerged from the dungeon. With Henna's help, he hoisted the fishing boat onto the Atis Beauty's davits, gathered all the china and tinware, and opened the silo. It was time to truly part ways. Lorraine handed Henna the deed to the silo, old Barry's IOU, and £200, and smiled faintly. "I should go now. I hope we'll meet again in the future." Henna's eyes were a little confused. "Can you drive this big ship by yourself?" "I could." Lorraine felt weak and couldn't help but smile bitterly. "It may be a little difficult now. I can help you." "Huh?" Lorraine raised her eyebrows in surprise. "You can drive a boat too?" Henna shook her head confidently. "No. But I learned things very quickly. This is not a problem." "If this is not a problem, then leave Black Harbor and go to the unfamiliar sea. Here is not home." Henna looked at the blood-stained warehouse, her eyes getting brighter and brighter. "I hate it here, but I can't find a way out. Going to the sea may be the right direction." She turned around and smiled at Lorraine. "And it's fun to be with you. Occasionally, it's fun not to measure life with money. It's also fun." "Really?" Lorraine also smiled. "Ms. Henna Yesla, congratulations, you are accepted." Thick smoke rose from water tank number 3. Amidst the blazing flames, a large, slightly portly vessel lurched out of the water gate, jerking but determinedly heading for the vast strait, setting sail. To teach Henna the art of lookout and steering, the Atis Beauty drifted in the calm strait with its sails furled for 10 days. In those 10 days, Henna, a quick learner, had barely become a competent sailor, and Lorraine's injuries had largely healed. Although still at risk of rupture, he was able to resume his daily routine. At the beginning of April, the Atis Beauty returned to Plymouth. Lorraine registered the ship's cargo at the Soto Harbor Authority, paid a £3 escrow fee, and then disembarked. He and Henna boarded a carriage and headed for Axminster, a town renowned for its flowered carpets. It was Lake's hometown. The carriage stopped in front of a cream-colored, 2-story building. Lorraine and Henna hopped out and saw a sturdy boy in a sailor's shirt in the yard. He was a handsome young man, probably only 8 or 9 years old, with the same flaxen hair and emerald green eyes as Lake. He was using a branch as a sword, and was seriously attacking the big tree in the yard. This reminded Lorraine of his own 8-year-old self. The first time he was 8, he was in the 2nd grade of elementary school, and he had killed his first little turtle in his life. He regarded pulling girls' pigtails as his only way of expressing his affection. The second time he was 8, he was on a galleon sailing to the Indian Ocean because of a sudden storm. He vomited profusely and doubted whether he could survive to reach Calcutta. Of course, he was not Lorraine yet. Lorraine laughed and raised his hand to ring the bell at the door. Ding-ling, ding-ling. The boy, who was practicing swordsmanship, seriously looked up blankly and saw a man and a woman outside the fence. Both were very young and tall. The man wore a tuxedo, held an umbrella, and wore a top hat. The woman wore a loose, pure black gown. Her face covered with a veil, revealing only her straight nose and emerald green eyes. A strange combination, a strange and unfamiliar combination. The boy was cautious, holding the branch and carefully approaching the door. He asked through the fence, "Sir, madam, are you looking for, are you Pierce? Pierce Artis, son of Lake Artis?" "Yes." Lorraine closed his eyes, recalling Lake's broken and desperate look in the dungeon. After a moment, he opened them again. My name is Lorraine Arthur Drake, a crew member of Mr. Artis's. I regret to inform you that your father has passed away. He fell ill with a fever while sailing. He died peacefully, crack. Pierce stood there, stunned. The branch fell to the ground. Before he died, Lake entrusted me to be your guardian. Lorraine and Hina entered Lake's simple and shabby ancestral home, sat in the living room, and whispered about the next arrangements for Pierce. I plan to send you to Plymouth Naval Academy. Sir Leighton is my mentor, an upright, rigorous and faithful nobleman, the best instructor at the Naval Academy, and the most outstanding officer in the Royal Navy. He has no children. I will persuade him to become your adoptive father. This will help your future. Lorraine crossed his fingers, frowned, and looked at Pierce with an uneasy expression. And the Atis beauty, this was Lake's ship, and now it is your ship. I hope to buy it. Hina silently took out a bundle of gold pounds from under her coat, a total of 100 coins. Lorraine continued, the Atis beauty is a standard Kirk type, with a market value of 500 pounds, which I can't afford at the moment. Of the 100 pounds, 50 pounds are the proceeds from this trade and are Lake's property. For the other 50 pounds, I hope to temporarily rent the beauty, with a rent of 50 pounds every 2 months. I will sign an IOU and settle the ship price and the remaining rent with you within 1 year, totaling 750 pounds. Of course, if you don't trust me, you can find a local gentleman to notarize this IOU, and I will pay for the notarization fee. After saying this, Lorraine took a deep breath. Pierce, are you willing to accept my arrangement? Pierce looked at him blankly. Mr. Drake. Lorraine nodded slightly. Father told me that the beauty is very old and can only be sold for 200 pounds. Lorraine smiled disdainfully. The captain doesn't understand ships. He was cheated. Old hides cannot be sold at the same price as new hides. Although I have never learned to tan leather, I have followed my father in business since I was a child, so I still understand this principle. Pierce looked at Lorraine gratefully. You are a good person and you consider me wholeheartedly, but I can't accept your arrangement. Why? I want to go to sea. Pierce clenched his little fists, his face full of determination. After getting the ship, my father's dream was to become a maritime merchant. I want to inherit his will, not inherit a large inheritance, and become an outstanding person, but completely different from him. You want to go to sea? I want to go to sea. Pierce stood up and waved his arms excitedly in front of Lorraine. Mr. Drake. After my father passed away, I learned to swim, learned to fish, and learned simple cooking. I am hardworking and brave. I can wash the deck on the ship, cook, keep watch and move goods. I can do without that ship. He looked at me pleadingly. Sir, will you accept me? Let me go to the sea like my father. Okay. Lorraine looked at him steadily. Becoming a merchant sailor is hard work. You have to learn a lot, and you have to know that the sea is a cannibal. I'm not afraid of death. Compared to death, I'm more afraid that after you send me to Mr. Leighton, I'll slowly forget my father. I don't want to forget him. I don't want to forget. Big tears rolled from the boy's eyes, but he kept his eyes open, afraid to miss that slight nod that might come. Lorraine smiled wryly and looked at Hannah. Hannah, you know, I was also 8 years old when I went to sea for the first time. I was an intern in a merchant ship owned by a relative. I could do nothing but cause trouble. Hannah was quiet, without any expression. You are the captain. You don't need to ask for my opinion. You are shirking your responsibility. You guessed right. Really? The bitter smile on Lorraine's face became even more intense. Pure sadness. The boy stood up straight with a snap. Yes, Mr. Captain, in the near future, I will set up the Drake Chamber of Commerce. If you bring a ship as a shareholder, I can consider giving you 10% of the shares. Lorraine said carefully. This may very likely be a losing deal, because if the assets of the Chamber of Commerce cannot exceed 8,000 pounds, the value of 10% of the shares will be lower than my original arrangement for you. I don't care about money. Sir, you have to learn to care, because businessmen are born to deal with money. Lorraine stood up, smiled and extended his hand to Pierce. Welcome, second mate intern Mr. Pierce Satis. You are accepted. In the age of sail, the first mate was in charge of the deck and cargo, the second mate was in charge of materials, routes, and port arrivals and departures, and the third mate, the captain of the ship, was in charge of people. This is essentially how the current system of 1 chief and 3 mates originated. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 15, The Fertility. The Scottish Sea, the Firth of Moray. After 12 days of continuous sailing, the Bell, with a crew of 3, crossed a crystal-clear estuary of the Spey River and finally arrived at the dark port of Elgin in north-central Scotland. Elgin is a well-known dark port. Calling it a dark port is inappropriate, as the proper Elgin is not a port at all, but the capital of the county of Moray, part of the Kingdom of Scotland. However, Scotland was in a state of recession, and the county of Moray built a port at Lossiemouth, but it failed to generate profits for the county. Learning from their mistakes, the Scots built a new port east of Lossiemouth, allowing the gentry to receive black merchants. They even gave the dark port the insinuating name of Elgin, and from then on, the county of Moray truly prospered. However, this incident had a side effect. Because of the Scottish accent, merchants could not distinguish between Golden and Elgin. Over time, Elgin became pronounced as Elgin, and the inland capital of Moray was transformed into a unique, dark port near Lossiemouth, renowned for its order and welcoming spirit. Lorraine chose this place as her first stop, partly because she admired its reputation for order and partly because the Scots were financially strapped, and inferior spices, difficult to sell in England, found a good market here. The Bell sailed towards shore at half sail. From afar, Henna, standing on the lookout, excitedly shouted, "I see the harbor." Due south, Lorraine laughed. Henna, switch hands. Pierce, cast off the foresail, and lower the sails in a few nautical miles. Yes, Captain, the waters of Elgin were deep and calm. With sails lowered, the Bell steered smoothly towards the dock, constantly adjusting its course with a foresail as it advanced, demonstrating the crew's excellent handling skills. On the dock, alternating red and white flags fluttered, guiding the Beauty to the nearby Pier 7, where she dropped anchor close to the shore. This was no difficulty for Lorraine. A moment later, the Beauty's bow gently bumped against the embankment. Pierce released the anchor disc, and the shiny iron anchor sank to the bottom with a clang. Henna, stay aboard. Pierce, go to the poop and pick out a set of fine china, and come with me to visit the local gentleman. Lorraine lashed the bowsail and, with a snap, lowered the planking. He smiled at the pilot, whose command was so precise, and with a flick of his finger, a gleaming silver shilling flew into the air. Nice chess talk, sir. The pilot took the shilling and, beaming, tucked it into his pocket. Nice sailing, sir. The sedan chair was carried by everyone, and with this compliment, the subsequent handshake became a natural progression. Sir, this is our first time doing business in Elgin. Is there anything we should be aware of? The pilot frowned, thinking for a moment. First of all, you have to respect the living habits of the Scots and be familiar with and abide by Scottish laws. Although this is a black port, it is an orderly black port. Lorraine shrugged. Don't I need to visit the management committee? That's another matter. The pilot chuckled. If you want the laws of the black port to protect you and your crew, you must obtain permission from the management committee before trading. Of course, this is mainly to obtain a tax plate, which is used to declare taxes at the port authority. A black port that needs to declare taxes. Where should I go to get a tax plate? Number 17, Flower Street. This is the office of the management committee. There are 3 gentlemen on duty in the Blackport Management Committee in turn. This month it is Mr. Carl Piddock. Thank you very much for your advice. Lorraine waved his hand and saluted as a gentleman. Seeing Pierce getting off the ship with an exquisite small box, he presented another shilling. Mr. Piddock likes porcelain. Who doesn't like porcelain on the British Isles? Number 17, Flower Street. After bidding farewell to the enthusiastic pilot, Lorraine and Pierce knocked on the door and were smoothly led by the brown-haired secretary to the second floor, where they met Mr. Piddock of the management committee. Piddock was a typical Celtic, with a round red nose and thick blonde hair. His blonde hair was thickly oiled, shining and smooth, and he covered it with a pure white curly wig, adding a touch of formality and bureaucracy. With a tea set in the noble blood of the Drake family, Lorraine was entitled to sit on the sofa on their first meeting. The exquisite tea set from the east now sat on the coffee table between them. Piddock examined the azure teacup, unable to let it go. Lorraine smiled and said, "The sky blue glaze comes from the peculiar porcelain firing technology of the Qing dynasty in the east. Its full name is copper-based cloisonné enamel. This technology originated in the Zhou dynasty more than 2,000 years ago, and reached its peak during the Jingtai period of the Ming dynasty, so it is also called cloisonné, Jingtailan." Mr. Piddock smacked his lips. pondering the difficult pronunciation, mysterious oriental country, the erudite little Mr. Drake. He carefully put the teacup back into the wooden box and closed the lid with a click. Mr. Drake, are you really from Devonshire? A disdained descendant of an exile isn't worthy of impersonating. Lorraine crossed his legs and settled into a more comfortable sitting position. Sir, I've brought some spices and East India pewter, hoping to secure permanent business licenses in Elgin. Spices and pewter? Mr. Piddock looked surprised. You look so young, yet you've already opened up routes to the east. Lorraine laughed and waved his hand. You misunderstand. Spices and pewter are the spoils of an unforgettable experience. I'm just a fledgling merchant. Sooner or later, I'll go to the east, but not now. I see your shining points again: courage, confidence, and honesty. You're too kind. After a few pleasantries, Mr. Piddock adjusted his posture, resting his hands on his knees and sitting upright. Lorraine also adjusted his posture in due time, and calmly exchanged glances with Mr. Piddock. Even young Pierce knew the real talk was about to begin. Mr. Piddock cleared his throat and quietly summoned his secretary, instructing her to carefully store the embroidery. He then fetched a blank tax invoice and a VIP invitation. The secretary glanced at young Lorraine with surprise, but nonetheless ran back and forth to comply with Mr. Piddock's request. The two letters were quickly placed before Lorraine. Both were rolled parchment, cut into squares and engraved with beautiful floral calligraphy. Mr. Piddock asked Lorraine's full name, then wrote on the tax invoice with a quill pen, signed his name, and sealed it with wax. Then, while the wax was still wet, he carefully affixed a ribbon flower. He solemnly handed the tax plaque to Lorraine. Mr. Drake, the port of Elgin welcomes a noble bloodline like yours, one that is honest, brave, confident, knowledgeable, and generous. With this plaque, you will enjoy the protection of Scottish law and the oversight of the gentlemen of Elgin. You may buy and sell, acquire property, and make reservations in Elgin. The tax rate for each transaction is 20%, and purchases and sales are settled independently. Separate purchases and sales mean that the Black Port will take a 40% cut of each transaction. This is the world of black marketeers. This commission was ridiculously high, but after his experience in Cherbourg, Lorraine felt it was worth it. He immediately extended his hands and solemnly accepted it. Thank you, Mr. Piddock, for your trust and support. I hope our friendship will be as long-lasting as the sound of a Scottish bagpipe, forever and ever. That's my hope, too. Entry to the port was granted. Lorraine rolled up the plaque and handed it to Pierce, curiously eyeing another document on the table. Mr. Piddock, this is. Mr. Piddock resumed his relaxed sitting posture and said with a smile, you are already a resident businessman in the port. I must tell you about Urgen's trading rules, including Urgen. Most black ports in Northwest Europe do not support private transactions. Generally speaking, we have two ways of trading. He stretched out two fingers and bent one of them. The first is an exchange. You must have your own industry, register with a port authority, and accept accounting audits. Every transaction of yours must be recorded. The port authority collects commercial taxes every 3 months and still refunds your contribution to the Black Port. Generally speaking, if your trade volume for half a year exceeds £5,000, the tax refund will be 5%. If it exceeds £10,000, the tax refund will be 10%, and the highest is 50%. Lorraine calculated in his head that if the trade volume reached £50,000, he would only need to bear a 10% tax on the transaction. Of course, it would be collected first and then refunded. He nodded. What about the second type? The second type is for traveling merchants who don't have an exchange, like you. Black Harbor has an auction every 15 days. Taxes are collected on site, and no tax refunds are included, but the venue itself does not charge any additional commissions. Lorraine looked at Mr. Piddock with interest. Is this the invitation to the auction? Auctions don't require invitations, Piddock corrected with a smile. This is the VIP invitation to the auction. VIPs of the management committee who have their own private rooms. The environment is quieter, the seats are more spacious, and even the legitimate transaction tax is only 15% of the payment. Mr. Piddock smiled and handed the invitation to Lorraine. Mr. Drake, this is a gift from a friend. I hope you like it. Chapter 16 Voyage Log. CE 1776, April 28, light breeze, 4 knots, early longitude. 356.6, latitude. 57.7, Black Harbor, Elgin, Scotland. Specialties: whiskey, woolen textiles, beef. Today is a special day for the newly born Drake Chamber of Commerce. We have our first permanent port, Port Elgin in Scotland. Only in Mr. Piddick's official documents, it is called Port Elgin. No matter what it is called, we have opened up the market, and let this small chamber of commerce with a total of 3 people, a standard Kirk-type ship and more than £400 of funds officially get on the track of development. The exquisite porcelain of the mysterious East played an indispensable role. I miss the East. When can I go back and have a look? It's 1776. Hearing people call you foreign lord isn't a big deal, but the pigtails are just too unsightly. Back to the point, it's time for the Chamber of Commerce to consider its next development direction. For near-sea trade, the triangular trade model is a good one. With Elgin as the fulcrum, which of the other 2 corners should we choose? By the dim light of an oil lamp, Lorraine diligently rowed in his logbook on the swaying waves. A logbook is essential for every sea captain. At sea, they record wind direction and currents. In port, they record longitude and latitude, local specialties, and, of course, daily observations and reflections. Precisely because of this crucial information, logbooks have always been a captain's most precious privacy and treasure, surpassing even their personal nautical charts. Captains guarded their diaries with the utmost care. Besides carrying them on their person and keeping them secret, they often used code words to include key information. Lorraine's secret language was Pinyin, cursive Pinyin mixed with English in the same handwriting. At least in modern times, his diary was undecipherable. After finishing his diary, Lorraine closed it and tucked it away in the captain's cabin. Then, lying on his bed, he spread out a chart of the North Sea and the Cantabrian Sea, and stared blankly at the list of lots delivered before nightfall. This was a privilege for VIP guests at the auction. They could receive detailed information about the sale 2 days in advance and decide whether to attend. This gave Lorraine the opportunity to familiarize themselves with the auction's rules. Elgin's auctions were held in 2 sessions, the morning for specialty items and the afternoon for bulk goods, lasting 2 days. Lorraine's spices and pewter were also included in this list. 470 kilograms of spices were auctioned in 9 lots of 50 kilograms, each in the afternoon session. 14 lots of pewter were bid individually in the morning session. According to Lorraine's own estimate, these goods would bring him a profit of between £230 and £200 after tax, a relatively modest sum for a no-cost business. He debated whether to sell off his porcelain inventory. It was frustrating. Oldbury didn't have many porcelain sets, only 7 in total, but each one was a high-end tea set. 3 cloisonné sets, 2 Dowcay porcelain sets, and 2 blue and white porcelain sets. Tea sets of this quality could certainly be sold, easily fetching over £200. But judging by Mr. Piddick's reaction, these items would clearly make better gifts. Exchanging them for gold pounds would be a waste of resources, a waste of money. But Lorraine was short of money. He needed to open an exchange, buy ships, hire sailors, ensure a healthy flow of goods, and maintain sufficient funds to operate the Chamber of Commerce and establish a capital chain. He scratched his head irritably. Damn it, being poor is fine. At worst, I can just stay at the auction house for a few more months. Until the eastern route is established, every use of this fine stuff is a waste. What do you mean by use? Every use is a waste, Henna interrupted, confused. Lorraine looked up and saw her wrapped in her veil, just as she had been during the day. But in the stillness of the night, she had removed her veil, revealing her delicate features. Her emerald eyes sparkled in the moonlight. Lorraine smiled and shook her head. Is it time for a shift change? Yes, Henna nodded. Pierce is still young. His shift is 1 hour, and then it's your turn. I won't mistreat him. Lorraine beckoned Henna in. The auction is in 2 days. Elgin's specialty is whiskey, and I'm planning to fill the hold. In the icy Scandinavian landscape, strong liquor is easy to sell. Selling liquor, Henna tilted her head. Do you have a route to the Black Port of Norway? No. So for the first auction, we need to get that chart. With it, we'll have our next anchorage. 2 days passed in a flash. On April 30th, the black market auction at Elgin Port commenced as scheduled in the small theater at 42 Blossom Street. Carriages gathered like fish, and hundreds of merchants gathered in groups of 3 or 5. Today, Lorraine was wearing a well-fitting tuxedo, a wig, a top hat, and a folded black umbrella. His pointed leather shoes were shining brightly. He jumped off the carriage outside the theater, turned around, and showed the back of his hand like a true gentleman. Henna was stunned. She was wearing a light black gauze coat today, covering her hair and shading her pretty face. The appropriate folds of gauze gave the coat layers of light and dark shadows, which cleverly concealed a strange battle robe inside the coat and made her graceful figure looming, which aroused people's imagination. Her big eyes hidden behind the gauze flickered and stared at Lorraine until she saw Lorraine's smiling encouraging eyes. Then she stretched out her brown bare hand from under the coat and gently placed it on the back of Lorraine's hand. Such a wonderful scene naturally attracted the attention of passers-by. A young, unfamiliar English gentleman, his arm around a young, light brown African woman. Her complexion suggested Egyptian origin. Could she be of mixed Carthaginian or Macedonian descent, a member of a distinguished royal family? They watched with bated breath as Lorraine, arm in arm with Henna, approached the Piddicks. Mrs. Piddick, shielding her feather fan, held out the back of her hand to Lorraine. Lorraine nodded in greeting, intertwining his long fingers with hers and bringing them to his lips, about an inch apart, in a kissing gesture. Henna's large eyes flickered again, as she debated whether to follow Mrs. Piddick's lead and offer her own hand to the 50-year-old man across from her. She was reluctant. Lorraine, perceiving her dilemma, leaned over with a touch of intimacy, whispering, "Just a greeting. A young woman doesn't need to kiss hands." Henna breathed a sigh of relief and gave Mr. Piddick a slight bow. Mr. Piddick laughed heartily. "Mr. Drake, you always surprise me every time we meet. Who's with you?" "Henna, Henna Yesla. She's the lookout on the ship and my most trusted companion. Her talent is unparalleled," Mr. Piddick praised. "Your box is number 7, next to mine. I sincerely hope you've found your ideal partner." "Indeed," Lorraine gestured to Mr. Piddick. "I just hope the competition won't be too fierce. It would be a shame if the bids were too high. Please vote. Please vote." Chapter 17 Scott Ballista. The Elgin Theatre was a classic whispering gallery structure, its soaring dome supported by rows of rib-like curved beams, which supported the flat, egg-shaped interior. At the front of the theatre was a circular stage, and near the entrance were 200 or 300 seats surrounding the stage, arched upward. On either side were 6 small, terraced private rooms, each only 4 or 5 square meters in size, but richly decorated. Lorraine took Henna's arm, nodded goodbye to the Piddicks, and walked onto the thick Scottish wool carpet into the private room. Inside, there were only 3 wide-backed purple flannel chairs, arranged around a small round table. On the table were 3 small mirrors with handles, tea and snacks, and a red and green tartan plaid sign with a large inscription, VI, on both sides. Lorraine moved a seat for Henna, then took the seat next to Mr. Piddick and raised the bone china teacup in front of her. "Tea," Henna lifted her veil. "The kind with sugar and milk, or nothing at all?" Henna thought for a moment. "Sure." Lorraine gave Henna a wry smile, pouring her amber-colored tea, about half full. The bitter aroma lingered, refreshing her senses. Henna lifted the cup with both hands, took a sip, frowned, and began adding milk and sugar. Plenty of milk, plenty of sugar. She stirred the amber tea until it turned milky white, and only then, satisfied, did she taste it. She licked her lips and muttered, "It tastes good. Sweet milk must taste good." The theater was brightly lit. The intricate glass chandelier cast a hazy glow on the dome, illuminating a podium in the center of the stage. On the podium stood a young gentleman, erect and straight, who bore a striking resemblance to Mr. Piddick. Mr. Piddick poked his head over the partition. "That's my nephew Ramos. He served in the Royal Navy, but injured his back and retired to run Black Harbor. He's a capable young man." "Young Mr. Piddick, he looks quite the man," Lorraine complimented. "I'll introduce you to each other after the meeting. You're all young people, you should get to know each other." Lorraine smiled and nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Piddick." Ramos stood on the stage and waited for a moment until the participating merchants had almost arrived. There were about 150 or 60 people sitting scattered around the stage, and 6 of the 12 private rooms were full. His uncle, Mr. Piddick, pointed to Lorraine with a sign, indicating that this was the Drake family's abandoned son whom he had specifically mentioned 2 days ago. Ramos cleared his throat and struck the hammer with a thud. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Elgin Harbor auction. I'm your Mick, Ramos Piddick. We have many rare and precious items on offer this time, and I sincerely hope you return with a bountiful harvest. First up, our first lot today, exquisite canvas from Lossiemouth." Lorraine absent-mindedly sipped his black tea in the private room. The tea was average, a native Scottish variety, not nearly as rich as those from Ceylon or India, but the milk was good, and the snacks were excellent. Lorraine had seen many auctions on television, art auctions, charity auctions, and land auctions. TV shows, of course. According to typical auction house procedures, the first 3 lots are used to warm up the crowd and aren't usually anything of value. Just like the canvas from Lost Emeth. A sailing ship's mainsail is often larger than the ship itself. Even if it gets torn during voyage, it's usually repaired. Who would occupy precious cargo space to store a large spare sail? Even if it's truly beyond repair, the ship will dock. Naturally, there are sails for sale at the shipyard, and they are rarely resold, so the price is cheap. Why bother to go through the trouble of preparing your own sails? The auction smoothly entered the third item. Ramos asked the workers to push a large cart, peeled off the oilcloth, and revealed an exquisitely crafted crossbow made of teak scraps. The crossbow was the main naval warfare weapon before the popularity of artillery. It consists of a base, a turntable, a crossbow, arrows, a long rope connected to the arrows, and a winch for reeling in the long rope. After the popularity of artillery, this backward weapon that was used as an auxiliary boarding and could barely destroy small fishing boats fell out of favor until the rise of the whaling industry, which turned it into sharp claw-on fishing boats. So it also has a more familiar name, called the harpoon cannon. This is Lorraine's first target in this auction, and it ranks third in priority. Ramos explained, Bell Dockyard is renowned in northern Scotland. This harpoon gun was designed and built by Crown Scott, an apprentice there. It's made of high-quality materials and meticulously crafted. It comes with 3 spare harpoons and 500 meters of standard harpoon line, and Mr. Scott has promised to install it himself. The starting price is £5, with increments of 10 shillings. Lorraine motioned for Hannah to raise her card. Ramos's eyes lit up, and he immediately shouted, Private Room 7, £5. Before he finished speaking, 4 or 5 cards were raised, and the price of the harpoon gun continued to climb, quickly reaching £8. Lorraine couldn't help but wonder, was the Elgin auction particularly popular with whalers? Otherwise, why would a harpoon gun that belonged in a museum be so popular? He leaned over the counter and exchanged glances with Mr. Pittock. Sir, would you mind explaining this to me? Pittock had been waiting for Lorraine to ask. He laughed heartily and explained, this bid is not for a cannon, but for the opportunity to contact Mr. Scott. Contact? An apprentice. He is no ordinary apprentice. Pittock kept it a secret. Riley Bell is the best shipbuilder in Mowbray County in recent decades. 10 years ago, he was a first-class master craftsman at the Devonport dockyard. Later, he was old and his eyesight was blurry, so he retired and returned to Lost Emeth, and then opened the Bell dockyard. Clen Scott is Mr. Bell's disciple, and the best disciple. He inherited his skills from his master, and he had already become an apprentice. It was only because Mr. Bell was in poor health that he stayed by his teacher's side as an apprentice to take care of him. Lorraine became interested. You mean, the apprentice is not an apprentice? In the past 6 years, he has been basically in charge of the Bell dockyard. Not only has the reputation of the dock not declined, but it has become better than when Bell ran it himself. Do you think he is an apprentice? Lorraine was confused when he heard Pittock say this. Sir, according to you, he is a loyal man and is highly valued. Why? Bell died years ago? Dead. Yes, Bell died. His son inherited the shipyard and hired a new master craftsman and manager within a month. Mr. Scott, the star of the shipyard, is still an apprentice to this day. Why do you think that is? Lorraine's eyes lit up. In a short time, the bid for the crossbow had risen to a high price of £11. Lorraine chuckled and took the sign from Hannah. £15. The venue suddenly became quiet. The nobleman in the private room bid a second time, raising the bid 8 times in one breath, obviously determined to win Scott. Most people began to hesitate, until Ramos began to count down, and then someone tentatively raised his rank, £15 and 10 cents, £30. Lorraine stood up and bowed to all the private rooms. He said, we are short of manpower on the ship. I am sorry to have embarrassed you all. Chapter 18 Captain Hook's chart. £30 once. £30 twice. £30. Congratulations, sir, in compartment 7. Mr. Scott will be joining you on board in 3 days. I hope you enjoy your time together. Lorraine bowed to Ramos from afar. He heard the hidden meaning in Ramos's words. Ramos, or rather the Pittock family, would pave the way for him, creating a favorable atmosphere for his meeting with Clen Scott. Such was the power of friendship. The auction continued. Because Lorraine, a member of the private class, unexpectedly joined the competition from the lower class. The excitement, originally estimated at 12 to 15 pounds, suddenly reached a climax. This was good news for the auction house. The subsequent auction proceeded smoothly and enthusiastically, with 14 lots sold in an hour, with no unsold lots. Lorraine's 3 pewter pieces went on the market, with an average price of £12, a premium that was in line with the prevailing market, around 20–30%. Lorraine also joined in the fun, buying an antique octant for £5.12. The octant is a professional distance measuring tool used by navigators and the predecessor of the sextant. The difference is that the former only measures 45 degrees, 1/8 of a circle, while the latter measures 60 degrees, 1/6 of a circle, and the latter also measures longitude and latitude with greater accuracy. While the sextant is undoubtedly more expensive, it's superior to the octant. But for Lorraine, the octant is at least better than the protractor, and everyone is happy. Another half hour passed, and the atmosphere in the auction hall gradually cooled. Lorraine's 4th pewter piece fetched only £10, and the 5th only £6.14. Throughout this entire process, no one in the upper private room raised a bid. The most important lot of the morning was about to go on sale. Ramos cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Rabbi Hook is a leading offshore merchant. His presence extends throughout northwestern Europe, making him renowned in the North Sea, the Baltic Sea, the Strait of Dover, and the Cantabrian Sea. Last month, he celebrated his 60th birthday and had a grandson, so he decided to retire. Ramos took a deep breath. He has entrusted the auction house with his retirement arrangements. His personal Northwestern European charts and the brigantine merchant ship, the Beautiful Fish, will be auctioned today and tomorrow. Today, let us see Captain Hook's charts. As he spoke passionately, 2 workers slowly wheeled forward a wooden box covered in azure velvet. The velvet was peeled back, revealing a dozen or so rolled-up charts tucked diagonally into the center of the box. While seemingly unremarkable, they were priceless to black market traders. Lorraine had inquired about Captain Hook's past over the past few days. This Dutchman had gone to sea at the age of 23, had been operating in coastal waters for 37 years, and had been a captain for 24. His primary operations were in the North Sea, and to a lesser extent, the Cantabrian Sea, which borders France and Spain. He had chosen not to sell his charts separately, suggesting that their value varied. However, given his comfort zone, Lorraine remained deeply interested in this chart. Taking a deep breath, Lorraine took the sign from Hannah. Ramos announced from the audience, Captain Hook's hand-drawn chart for his personal use. Starting price, £50, increments of £10, £100. Room 4 placed the first bid, followed by rooms 3, 9, and 11. The price of the chart skyrocketed, soon breaking through £200 and hurtling towards £250. Only a few large rooms in the entire venue were actively bidding. For most lower-class merchants, £200 might be all they had, and even if they were bankrupt, they might not be able to spare £200 in cash. The composition of maritime merchants has always been a pyramid structure with a huge gap between the rich and the poor. £220. Private room 9 withdrew from the competition. The gentleman opposite Lorraine stood up, bowed to all the private rooms with regret and grace, and then left. £270. The gentleman in private room 11 also stood up, bowed and left. The gentleman in rooms 3 and 4 chanted and laughed across the partition while casually taking turns to raise their cards, and soon raised the price of the chart to £400. This was more than all the cash Lorraine had, and Lorraine had not yet had the opportunity to bid. He frowned and asked Mr. Piddock, Sir, will the auction house settle the price after the end of the morning or after the end of tomorrow? Piddock smiled knowingly. It will be after the end of tomorrow. Lorraine nodded to him gratefully and gently raised the card in his hand. £410. Room 7, £410. Gentlemen 3 and 4, are you willing to give up your space to the gentleman in room 7? The gentleman in room 3 glanced up at Lorraine, then tilted his head to exchange a glance with Piddock. He smiled, stood up, and bowed with his female companion before leaving. Lorraine was stunned for a moment by this glance. Piddock whispered, Sir Formay is one of the 3 members of the board of directors and a good friend of mine. I see. Lorraine suddenly realized. Mr. Piddock, does Sir Formay enjoy tea? Very much. Very much. That left only number 4 to compete with Lorraine. He was a portly French gentleman. They liked to adorn their tailcoats with colorful feathers, Much like the English use umbrellas instead of canes, distinctive features that made them easily identifiable. For May's departure weighed heavily on him. Sweat began to form on his forehead, and his placard was no longer as resolute. Lorraine asked softly, Mr. Piddock, who's across from me, the manager of the urgent exchange, from the Dessex family. He's not a big shot. I remember the Dessex family gave him a mandate of £520. Really? Lorraine relaxed even more, crossing his legs, fingers intertwined, a smile on his face. The two exchanged bids for a few times, and when it reached £450, Lorraine suddenly said, £500, the whole room gasped. Mr. Dessex, in room 4, stared at Lorraine for a long moment, trying to discern the true intentions of this young stranger he was meeting for the first time. Lorraine simply smiled and raised his glass to him. Mr. Dessex gave up. He couldn't tell Lorraine's true intentions. Rather than despair and become a laughingstock, he decided to leave like a proper gentleman, smiling and humbly, with leniency and room for maneuver. He too raised his teacup. Sir, across from me, may you have smooth sailing. Lorraine stood up and returned the greeting. Thank you for your humility and generosity. French gentlemen possess such admirable virtues. The dust settled. For £500, Lorraine won Captain Hook's complete set of nautical charts. Seeing Mr. Dessex leave, Lorraine breathed a sigh of relief. Mr. Piddock came over with a smile. It's a pity that Dessex's authorization is not enough. I really hope that Vermeer can stay and let me see how much authorization your family has given you. Where's the authorization? I told you, I'm an abandoned child. The nobles in England have always been old-fashioned. Every family has several abandoned children like you. After all, isn't it all thanks to the efforts of the abandoned children that your family can maintain a decent life? You really can't hide anything from you. Lorraine couldn't help but smile bitterly. Anyway, thank you for your help today, and I would also like to trouble you to introduce me to Sir Vermeer. Thank you. Are you ready to go back? Piddock stretched out his hand and shook hands with Lorraine. I will let Ramos personally deliver today's auction items in the evening. As for the meeting with Vermeer, let's do it next week. You will be busier this week. Lorraine smiled and nodded. I sincerely look forward to it. Chapter 19, The Apprentice. The ingredients are marinated grilled chicken breast, toast, bacon, lettuce, tomato, butter, strawberries, bread and carrots. Instructions: trim the toast, spread butter on it, and place it on the bottom. Add lettuce and tomato, then bread. Stack the chicken breast and bacon on top of each other, then cover with another slice of toast. Cut it diagonally. Finally, top it with strawberries, sprinkle with shredded carrots, and insert thin wooden sticks. The perfect Grandma Rowling's Secret Royal Club sandwich. Done. In the galley of the Atis Beauty, young Pierce carefully sorted out the recipes left to him by Grandma Rowling, plated the sandwiches, picked them up, and opened the hatch. It was a bright sunny day, with a gentle breeze and soft waves. Lorraine was lying on the deck, working on a chart, referring to the huge nautical charts that surrounded him. Pierce approached with a sandwich and asked curiously, Captain, don't we already have Hooker's charts? Why did you redraw them? Because they were accurate. Lorraine added a smooth curve, put down his pen, and looked at Pierce. Hooker's charts provide us with the locations of 24 black ports, covering Norway, Finland, the Netherlands, Prussia, England, France, and Spain. They're worth every penny, but this set of maps must have been inherited or stolen. The markings have different handwriting, and the base map is very old. Judging from the coastline and signature, I'm guessing it's a civilian map from the Dutch Maritime Administration in the early 16th century. You figured that out. Pierce's eyes widened. Lorraine smiled and took the plate. To familiarize myself with the evolution of coastlines, I personally drew 17 versions of military straight maps from the 14th to the 18th century. Hooker's set also has straight maps, so we can roughly compare them. Wow. Ignoring Pierce, who was trying to find the difference between the maps, Lorraine put down his plate and picked up a piece of the sandwich. It tasted delicious. The lettuce and tomato perfectly offset the greasiness, highlighting the savory and salty flavors of the chicken and bacon. The fresh butter complemented the toast, creating a smooth, fluid texture that varied the textures and left a lingering aftertaste. Lorraine chewed a few bites and praised, Little Pierce, is this another of Grandma Rowling's secret recipes? Yes, Pierce said without looking up. Sir, what's the difference in the picture? The most obvious change is Dunkirk, around the Pont de Calais. Lorraine devoured 3 large pieces and patted his stomach. Did you send it to Henna? Lady Jesla is practicing knife throwing, and I left it in her cabin." Lorraine nodded with satisfaction, then suddenly his expression changed. "Wait, bacon." Pierce jumped up with a jerk. "Oh my god. I'll be right back." Lorraine chewed a sandwich with a wry smile as he watched little Pierce's flustered figure scurry into the stern cabin. 3 days after the auction, the visit to Sir Fermi had yielded positive results. Cron Scott had not yet arrived to install the harpoon cannon. Pittock sent Ramos word that Cron was completing his resignation paperwork at Bell Dockyard. This meant that, although the two had yet to meet, the Pittock family had already resolved the biggest obstacle to Cron's arrival. And then there were the auction proceeds, the harpoon gun, the octant, and the nautical chart. To purchase these 3 items, Lorraine paid a total of £615, 18 shillings and 10 pence, including taxes, for almost £616. The after-tax proceeds from the pewter and spices were only £281. To ease the financial pressure on the Merchant Guild, Lorraine, after careful consideration, decided to temporarily add a Dowcay porcelain tea set to the next day's auction. This was against standard auction procedures, but considering the quality of the porcelain Lorraine offered, Ramos traveled overnight to all 9 VIPs at the auction, acknowledging their understanding and approval. The tea set was then auctioned, sparking a bidding frenzy comparable to that of the beautiful fish in the morning session the next day, ultimately selling for £323 after taxes. This sum proved to be Lorraine's lifeline. With cash in hand, he went all out that afternoon, securing 3 bids at an average price of £1.50 British pounds per barrel, buying a total of 150 barrels of third-grade whiskey, which he used to refill the holds of the Atis Beauty. After the round of transactions, he still had nearly 160 British pounds in cash, a sum that would, in most cases, be sufficient to cover any future problems facing the merchant ship. His next destination, a trip to Northern Europe, was also confirmed. Near Stavanger, the 4th largest city in the Kingdom of Norway's Bakenfjord, stood an unnamed black harbor. Hooker had also named it Stavanger. It was a Viking black harbor, and Lorraine was eagerly anticipating the upcoming meeting with his compatriots. With everything now in place, his only remaining task in Elgin was to recruit Crone. Lorraine took a deep breath and picked up his protractor again. He hadn't finished calculating the longitude and latitude of a new harbor when Ramos's voice suddenly rang out from below. Lorraine, after all, they were both young men, and they had both served in the Royal Navy together. After a few days together, Lorraine and Ramos had established a close enough friendship to call each other by name. Ramos called from below, "Lower the planking." "Look who I brought." Confused, Lorraine looked up and saw a tall, muscular, white-haired young man standing next to Ramos. He had a prominent nose, pale complexion, deep-set amber eyes, and thick eyebrows. He wore a beige short-sleeved shirt and brown cotton trousers. A massive hammer, half his height, was strapped to his back. He carried a large, oil-stained wooden box, yet it gave off an oddly neat and tidy impression. He was also incredibly tall. Ramos, who was about the same height as Lorraine, was already over 180 centimeters tall, but he seemed considerably shorter next to him. Looking at his sturdy arms, a name suddenly popped into Lorraine's mind: Cram Scott. "Unworthy boatman's apprentice, are you finally here?" Lorraine quickly lowered the planking. The young man and Ramos strode onto the ship and soon stood opposite Lorraine. Ramos introduced with a smile, "Lorraine, this is Viking." Lorraine interrupted Ramos and asked with his head tilted up. The young man grinned. "Germanic, but my homeland is the Kingdom of Finland, no wonder. As far as I know, there are few people as tall as you in both Prussia and the Holy Roman Empire." Lorraine reached out and squeezed the young man's cast iron arm. "And strong." The young man bulged his biceps in front of Lorraine. "It can't be helped. Boating is physically demanding, and I'm an exceptional sailor." "How exceptional?" "Unparalleled in the world." Lorraine laughed and shook his head, extending his hand to the young man. Lorraine Andrew Drake, Cren Scott, an unwanted boatman apprentice." Cren stared proudly into Lorraine's eyes. "Captain, are you short of anything on your ship, if you're talking about a master boatman and an unparalleled sailor?" "Yes." With a snap, the two large hands clasped together firmly. Lorraine smiled and said, "Mr. Scott, congratulations, you've been accepted. The boatman is online, asking for votes." Chapter 20. Why do I feel like I'm on a pirate ship? 7 days later, the Atis Belle received her first installation. Crone's craftsmanship was undeniably exceptional. He constructed a 3-meter-long, 5-meter-wide, and nearly 2-meter-high forecastle deck at the bow. The harpoon gun's turntable and the large winch for reeling in the rigging were mounted aft of the deck. The bell's bowmast, pointed obliquely toward the sky, stood independently, without intersecting the deck. This unique design allowed the harpoon gun to maintain a broad, 90-degree forward-firing angle. More importantly, by fine-tuning the position of the triangular bowsail, he freed up a bowsail operating area at the front of the deck, successfully preserving the limited upwind maneuvering capabilities of a standard cog. This was crucial for a sail-powered ship. After completing the bow adjustments, he set his sights on the bell's stern. Lorraine and Hannah had captured a paddle-powered fishing boat in Cherbourg's Black Harbor and used it as a launch on the starboard davit of the Atis Bell. The launch was certainly important, granting seamen the right to land in nearly any natural harbor, whether shallow and silted or rocky. However, its weight also disrupted the Beauty's overall balance. Crone's solution was simple. He constructed a dozen wooden barrels, filled them with sand and gravel, and secured them to the Beauty's port side. This approach not only prevented crew movement on deck but also restored the ship's center of gravity. The only drawback was that it added considerable weight to the stern. Neither Lorraine nor Crone cared much about this side effect. A standard cog was never intended to be a high-speed vessel. Even with full square sails, a speed of 8 to 10 knots was insufficient to lift the bow in a wave, creating the risk of capsizing. With the cost-effective modifications complete, Crone, energized, turned his attention to the mainmast. He suggested to Lorraine, "Captain, I plan to move the mainmast of the Beauty forward 5 meters, and then install a 15-meter-high secondary mast 10 meters apart." Lorraine asked absent-mindedly while drawing a nautical chart. Why? Crone was choked by this answer for a long time. Because the double-sided square sail can make the ship faster, I've calculated that after the modification, the speed of the Beauty can reach about 10 knots, which is basically equivalent to the brig type of the same level under full sail. We can also install full sail ropes, full jib sails and catching sails in one step. Even against the wind, the Beauty can maintain a speed of 2 to 3. Perfect. Lorraine put down the quill pen helplessly. Mr. Scott, do you know how much such a modification will cost? I can preside over the construction. If it only costs materials and labor, it will be about £800. 800 pounds. Lorraine smacked his lips. Very good design. Rejected. Crone grabbed his hair in disbelief. Why? It's simple. I don't have money. You told me that the family of the famous hereditary Baron Drake has no money. Drake is Drake, and Lorraine Drake is Lorraine Drake. Did Ramos tell you when he introduced me to you that I was the abandoned son of the Drake family? He did. He also said that the English aristocracy has always been hypocritical, old-fashioned, arrogant, and shameless. Every family with a long history has several abandoned sons like you. What he said is basically right. As far as I know, the Drake family does have 2 nominal abandoned sons, who are responsible for operating the American and Asian routes respectively to make profits for the family. What about you? Unfortunately, I happen to be the first real abandoned son in Drake's history, the kind that is worthy of the name. Crone suddenly had a bad premonition. Excuse me, how much salary do you pay your seafarers? Lorraine recalled carefully. The Drake Chamber of Commerce is still in its infancy. For the time being, the sailor's salary will be controlled at £20 to £30 per year, which is roughly in line with the market price. As for the seamen, food and accommodation are provided, and they will share the bright future of the Chamber of Commerce with me. Crone was shocked. I don't even have a salary. Lorraine shrugged embarrassedly. Young people, having a future is enough. Why do you need money? Crone took a deep breath. What do we eat? Grandma Rolling's secret recipe. Where is Grandma Rolling? I've been on the ship for 7 days, and I haven't seen any cook come to cook on the ship. Lorraine answered seriously. It's a good thing you didn't see her, because she went to see God joyfully 7 years ago. Before she left, she gave her lifelong secret recipe to our dear little Pierce. His cooking skills are authentic. Then where do we live? Wasn't the dormitory allocated to you 7 days ago? The stern cabin, but my room is in the damn watertight cabin. Lorraine frowned. You're a shipwright, and I even prepared a separate work cabin for you. Besides the watertight compartment, where else would I find such a large space? Crone stared at his shameless captain in amazement, muttering to himself, why do I feel like I'm on a pirate ship? That's true. Lorraine patted her hip and stood up. Don't be fooled by the fact that there are only 4 of us and a pitiful harpoon cannon aboard the Atis Beauty, but she is indeed a genuine privateer. The letter of marque is hanging in my captain's cabin right now, and it was issued by the Queen herself. Queen, no fish on Fridays, Lorraine muttered in a spooky London accent. That Queen is our great and wise Virgin Queen, Queen of England, France, and Ireland, Elizabeth I. Her Majesty. Not eating fish equals supporting the leader. Crone heard the hidden meaning in Lorraine's words, and he had been getting along very well with this outstanding and talented young captain these days. He ultimately chose to remain aboard the Atis Beauty, even though the Drake merchants had shamelessly deprived the sailors of their wages, and even though Lorraine lacked the funds to fulfill his desire to refit the ship. Just as Lorraine had said, they were still young, weren't they? Young people, a future is enough, why do you need money? The proud Cren, with the permission of the ship's owner, Pierce Jr., had this phrase inscribed on the mainmast, declaring the completion of his refit. And so, on a clear, calm afternoon, the Atis Beauty hoisted the anchor. Hannah steered, Cren set sail, and Lorraine, draped in a windbreaker, folded his arms, 1 foot on the foredeck railing, his gaze fixed firmly ahead. He shouted, "Full port!" Hannah immediately turned the hand wheel, and the Atis Beauty reversed, carving a beautiful arc across the open Moray Firth, heading due east. Wind due east, 3 knots, light breeze, full sail. Crone took action, furling the bowsail and, with the assistance of Pierce the Younger, quickly hauling the broad square sail to the top. Lorraine raised his arm, pointing straight ahead. Atis Bell, bound for Stavanger, depart, sail. P.S. Eat no fish is a phrase that changed the fate of Britain. Originally, Catholicism required believers to abstain from meat on Fridays, eating only fish. To establish Protestantism as the state religion, Queen Elizabeth I issued a new decree urging Protestants to abstain from fish on that day. Since then, eat no fish has taken on the connotation of supporting a leader in Britain. Incidentally, this decree remains legal and adhered to by Protestants in the UK to this day. Chapter 21 The Twin Pirates. If Scandinavia is the source of the image of the dragon Nidhogg in Viking mythology, then Buckentfjord is undoubtedly the dragon's nostril, breathing fire and frost. After rounding Carm Island, the Atis Beauty entered Buckentfjord. The waters here are complex, with steep cliffs on both sides and small islands scattered along the way. The channel suitable for large ships widens and narrows, often crossing with other ships, often leaving only a few meters of space between them. In such conditions, Hannah's steering skills would undoubtedly be insufficient. Lorraine took over the wheel early and furled the mainsail. Hannah stood in the watchtower, and the crucial bowsail was entrusted to Cren. Their destination was the Black Harbour of Stavanger. Stavanger, the Kingdom of Norway's 4th largest city of the same name, was built on the Tangeners Peninsula on the western shore of the fjord. This prosperous Black Harbour was built in the island of Rons, less than 20 kilometers away, just across the sea from it. The boat glided across the water, following the contours of the island around the dock. Standing high at the helm, Lorraine could see a grassy slope to the south of the island. Atop it stood the renowned Utstein Abbey, its whitewashed walls and red roof. Built on the sunny slopes of Utstein Island, adjacent to Rennesøya, the abbey dates back to the Augustan era and was once the oldest religious structure in the Kingdom of Norway. It flourished for 400 years until the Reformation, which erupted throughout Europe in the 16th century. The abbey was abandoned by the king and given to the Iverson family. Subsequently, for various reasons, it became the private property of the Garman family. Coincidentally, the Garman family was the de facto controller of the Black Harbour of Stavanger, the sole member of the governing board. If the news from Elgin was true, Sir Garman, who managed the Black Harbour, had been expelled from his family for his unbelief, a castaway and a pure Viking. Lorraine narrowed his eyes at the thought. Sir Garman's faith and status were advantages, but his lack of contact with real Vikings was a disadvantage. How can we make the best use of our strengths and avoid our weaknesses to quickly open up the trade route to Stavanger? He was thinking deeply when a tall and slender gunboat suddenly appeared behind the side of the Atis Beauty. She set sails in the narrow channel, tearing through the waves and brushing against the side of the Beauty. The crew of the Beauty was startled. Lorraine steered the ship and Cren controlled the sails, scrambling to avoid the possible collision. In the moment of passing by, Lorraine saw the flag flying on the opponent's mainmast. It was a black background with white stripes. The pattern was 2 skulls facing each other with their foreheads facing each other. Below the skulls were a sword and an axe, crossed in an X. 2 young men as tall as giants stood side by side on the deck. The one with long hair had a Scottish rapier on his waist, and the one with a bald head carried a wheel axe on his back. When the two sides were closest, Lorraine vaguely saw the bald man spit, "Tisk, Englishman." A moment later, the gunboat disappeared, and the terrified crew gathered around Lorraine. Little Pierce's face was pale, and the bump on his forehead from the fall was still red and swollen. He was trembling with lingering fear. "Captain, was that a skull flag just now? Are they real pirates?" Kren frowned deeply. Judging from the flag, they should be the Viking twin pirates who have become famous in recent years. The leaders are a pair of twin brothers, Leif and Bonnet from the Eriksson family. Hannah looked at Kren strangely. "Do you know them?" "I haven't met the two leaders, but the Blackport branch of Beldock has repaired ships for them, and has also handled merchant ships they robbed, so I am somewhat familiar with them." Pierce opened his mouth. "Their ship is so big." Lorraine held the steering wheel and shook his head slowly. "Standard brigantine, 30 meters long, 2 masts. The foremast is square-sailed, 20 meters high, and the mainmast is fore-aft-sailed, 22 meters high. The bowsprit is 5 meters, with 4 triangular sails, and 2 wind-catching sails between the 2 masts. This type of ship is a standard high-speed ship, with a speed of 12 knots with a wind and 5 knots against the wind. It is slender, stable and highly adaptable. She's not bigger than the Atis Bell. The reason you think she's bigger is mainly because her bowsprit is longer than the Bell's, and she has many more sails. Also, the brigantine has 5 decks. Even if you remove the 2 upper decks, her side is nearly 2 meters higher than the Bell's. Given a similar draft, Kren's face was solemn. "Captain, did you see what they have on deck?" "Cannons." Lorraine let out a long breath. "There are 8 6-pounders on the main deck. 2 of the stern gun ports on the poop are closed, and the 10 port ports on the gun deck are also closed. If fully loaded, that's 20 guns." Kren took a deep breath. This is a real gunboat. Even though they had prepared themselves mentally, the sudden encounter with the Gemini pirates in the waters of Black Harbor still cast a shadow on the crew of the Atis Bell. The North Sea was not peaceful. In this small sea, the Scots, English, French, and Dutch roamed the densely packed shipping lanes, and the most powerful and brutal of them all were the Vikings. Their bases were on the tiny islands dotted around the Scandinavian peninsula, numbering perhaps 20 or 30. The Gemini pirates were just one of these, and far from the most powerful. This rekindled a problem for Lorraine. If the Chamber of Commerce wanted to use Northern Europe as a pivotal point in the triangular trade, he had to properly address the pirate threat. Could Sir Garmin be an opportunity? Under the setting sun, the Atis Beauty slowly entered the calm harbor. Stavanger's docks were somewhat dilapidated and appeared far less organized than Elgin's. At least Lorraine didn't see a pilot. The ship randomly chose an unoccupied mooring pier to drop anchor, well away from the Gemini pirates on the other side of the harbor. Once the ship was anchored, Lorraine left Kren and Piers to guard it while he took Hannah into the harbor and began to inquire about Sir Garmin's hobbies and where he lived. He reasoned that since both Hannah and he were pagans, they should have naturally developed a bond in a Viking harbor that surpassed even faith in God. Unfortunately, his good intentions were tempered by bad luck. After asking around the harbor, he learned that Sir Garmin lived mostly on Ulstein Island, across the strait, visiting the Black Harbor only 2 or 3 days a month to handle chores. His last visit had been just 5 days ago. He preferred quiet and solitude, and hated strangers disturbing his peaceful existence. This was practically the worst possible news. It meant Lorraine would likely be stranded in this unfamiliar Black Harbor for a full month. He and Hannah reluctantly turned back. Upon reaching the dock, they discovered a group of pirate-like men roaring and attacking the Atis Beauty. About a dozen of them, shouting and clamoring, surrounded the plank and the ship. Kren cautiously removed the planking, preventing them from boarding directly. They began casting grappling lines and climbing onto the deck, following the boarding path. 5 or 6 grappling hooks slung simultaneously across the 20-plus meter-long main deck. Pierce, knife in hand, was furiously slicing away at the enemy. Kren had to protect him while simultaneously dealing with 3 or 4 other foes who had boarded the vessel. Soon, he had several bloody wounds on his body, and the defense was incredibly demanding. Lorraine was stunned. My ship was robbed at anchor? What the hell? Lorraine, who had been met with such resistance throughout the harbor, erupted in rage, speaking Chinese. Rage welled up within him, his courage rising to the occasion. With a clang, he drew his sword and lunged into the fray like a tiger descending from a mountain. Hannah, try to save some lives. Oh, please vote, please vote. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 22 Viking Choir. Lorraine and Henna charged into the fray like the wind. Unlike the battle at Cherbourg, Lorraine, unencumbered by a serious injury, displayed unparalleled fighting prowess. He charged through the narrow plank road, and the two pirates immediately spun, attacking from left and right with their swords. Lorraine ducked to avoid the blows, raised his arm, and rose. The iron hilt slammed into the first pirate's jaw, sending him flying, spitting blood, and plummeting into the sea. The pirate didn't even have time to scream. Having struck the target, Lorraine, still holding his raised arm, stepped forward and turned. His right foot slammed hard onto the plank road, and his raised arm, twisted by his body, bent his elbow and struck the second pirate square in the face with a thud. The pirate flew backward, knocking over 2 or 3 others like a bowling ball. Some, however, were quick enough to avoid the collision. With swords drawn and shouting fearlessly, they charged at Lorraine, the sudden, uninvited visitor. Lorraine had his back to them. Lorraine had his back to them, facing Henna. Henna leaped up, her lithe body landing on Lorraine's palm. A touch of her chest, a stomp of her shoulder, and she soared over 3 meters into the air. She spun. Her wide gown flared like a blossoming flower, and 4 streaks of cold light shot out from the whirling afterimage. With a fierce, imperceptible precision, they pierced the insteps of all 4 pirates. The charging pirates fell in a heap, clutching their wounded feet and howling. Lorraine took off, plunging through them like a bulldozer, sending bandits flying wherever he went. In a blink of an eye, the two of them had overwhelmed every enemy on the plank road. Lorraine rushed to the underside of the boat, kneeling as a ladder, and for the second time, he launched Henna, who was following closely behind, high into the air. Henna soared again, even higher than before, leaping onto the deck over 4 meters high. With a clang, she drew the skinning knife from her thigh. Pursing her lips, she charged between Kren and the pirates, plunging into the first pirate's arms like a fledgling swallow, stabbing him between the chest and abdomen. The pirate clutched his chest and collapsed. Henna rolled on the ground, avoiding the blade and diving into the second pirate's crotch. Her long, slender legs shot up into the air, and with a snap, she stabbed the pirate right between his legs. Ouch! A shrill, fox-like scream abruptly ended, and before it could finish, the pirate passed out from the pain. With Henna's help, Kren was finally free. The sturdy yet clumsy German scurried to the side of the boat, discarded his hammer, and lowered the planking. Before the planking was even in place, Lorraine sprang forward, leaping over Kren, crouching over the side like a wooden horse, and sending a flying kick sending the third pirate, who had swung his knife at Henna, flying. This agility left the last pirate stunned. Clearly, there were over a dozen of them, 4 on the boat and 10 on the plank road, while only 2 of the other side had returned. Clearly, they were pirates, living on the edge of a knife, while the other side was a mere sheep-like merchant. Clearly, the captain had told them that the English were so weak they could only cry out to God, never daring to raise a knife to a valiant Viking. Clearly. He shuddered and said hurriedly, "Let me tell you, my captain is..." Bang! Lorraine's powerful swinging fist slammed into his nose, sending him flying with overwhelming force like a tidal wave. He spun and flew, unable to finish his words. The battle was over. Wow! Wow! The sun had set, but the moon had not yet risen. Waves lapped against the harbor's breakwater, lazily swaying the ship. In the lingering glow of the sunset, the Atis beauty was fishing. The fishing rod was the boat's thick propeller, and the bait was 4 miserable pirates, bundled together. They were hung upside down at the stern, more than 2 meters from the hull and less than 20 centimeters from the sea level. It wasn't like this at the beginning. Lorraine was very kind. Even though little Pierce cut his index finger when cutting the hook line, and even though Kren had 4 cuts on his body and both arms were wrapped in bandages, he still let the pirates who served as bait keep a distance of 50 centimeters from the sea level. But the top students of the Naval Academy accidentally overlooked a small thing. It's high tide now. In about 10 minutes, the sea water will cover their mouths. By then, even if Odin rushed down from Asgard, they would definitely not survive. Good swimmers drown. Perhaps, this is fate. Lorraine, with a kind heart, raised his head and looked towards the port with a melancholy look. the compassionate Viking warriors appeared. The Eriksson twins, Leif and Bonnet, led over 30 men charging in with fury. They immediately spotted the pirates, used as bait, hanging upside down from the stern. Leif's bald head gleamed with rage. Vile Brits! Loki stole Sif's golden hair. Thor roared and slammed the door. Warriors will not spare their vile enemies, even at dusk. They can smile at death. The rhythmic chant rumbled like muffled thunder, casting horrified looks on the faces of the men on board. Down below, a Viking, at least 2 meters tall, the axe on his back taller than Pierce's. He was a pirate, bald, with a face thick with flesh, and bent on revenge. His henchman, now dangling from the stern by Lorraine, would soon drown. Faced with this, he actually recited a poem, and he sang it. Was he mad? 6 eyes jerked in unison at the only half-Viking on board. Their voracious thirst for knowledge made Lorraine feel particularly awkward. He coughed. Well, let me explain this to you. Although legends often portray Vikings as barbaric, rude, and illiterate, they were actually poets. Poets, yes, barbaric, rude, and irascible poets. When they were angry, they liked to sing hymns to condemn their enemies. Wrong, because they believed that the resounding power of poetry could travel across the universe and reach Asgard. The sensitive Valkyries, upon hearing it, would despise the condemned individual and, upon descending to earth, would not receive their soul to Valhalla for bliss. After Lorraine's explanation, the crew's expressions were no longer described as seeing a ghost. Kren opened his mouth and muttered, "Are you serious?" 100% serious, Lorraine said helplessly, spreading his hands. Anyway, I'm going to note after I die. I'm not that familiar with the interview process for Valhalla, the 6 eyes suddenly understood. Little Pierce glanced at the rising sea level. Captain, there's a choir of over 30 people down there. What should we do? Let's plank the boat. I can't handle things like cursing, Lorraine sighed, as if suddenly remembering something. Oh. By the way, let's lower the bait a little. I think the tide's rising again. Lorraine and Henna disembarked, while Kren held the plank tightly on deck. They slowly walked to the end of the plankway. Lorraine gently drew his sword and asked with drooping eyes, Mr. Eriksson, please tell me, have I offended you? Leif was stunned. Lorraine was actually trying to reason with him. The Vikings, though reckless, were not true barbarians. Some principles of conduct were universal. In this case, he had allowed his men to rob the Bell in the first place. While Lorraine's counterattack was a bit harsh, he showed restraint by not killing anyone and not singing choirs. On the contrary, he not only acted relentless, but also cut off Lorraine's passage to Valhalla. Come to think of it, he seemed to be a little in the wrong. The biggest problem was the location. He was a pirate, and robbing merchant ships was his duty, but this was Sir Garmund's Black Harbor. Sir Garmund's Black Harbor was the home of all Viking pirates. They brought gifts to your home as guests. How could you rob their ship? Does that mean an apology? Leif glanced behind him guiltily. In his excitement just now, he brought a lot of people with him. It seems that he can only pretend to be stubborn. Incessant chatter is the shamelessness of the shameless. He unsheathed his great axe, slammed it into the ground with a clang, and chanted aloud. Ratatoskr stood atop the world tree, eagles and dragons ashamed to associate with him. Mimir went to Vanaheim as a hostage, only to be beheaded by the wise gods. Lorraine translated, he means, he refuses to talk, refused to talk. Henna didn't understand what was going on. The verses began again. 3 years of wretched winter, a cruel twilight will finally arrive. Heimdall blows the galler, and gods and heroic spirits gather at the Rainbow Bridge. The verse ended, and Bonnet, beside Leif, drew his greatsword. Lorraine's expression finally grew serious. He whispered to Henna, the hairless ones are mine, the hairy ones are yours. Be careful, he just said, a fight to the death. Leif hefted his great axe, crouched, and gathered his strength. Only a broken web remains around the fates, and Mimir's head remains silent. Victorious Frey, tell me. Is my opponent Fenrir or Gamera? Leif uttered a high note, and Lorraine raised his sword. He gazed at the poet, like a victorious god answering his worshipper's question. He whispered, yes, you, mother, P.S. I know there are a lot of flaws in the hymn, but this is indeed a custom recorded in Viking history. Fasipum. Here are a few corresponding names. Ratatoskr, a squirrel on the branches of the world tree, very talkative and prone to offending others. Mimir, a wise giant, sent to Anaheim in exchange for Njord's hostage in Asgard. He was eventually disliked by the Vanir for his talkativeness, and their heads were chopped off and returned to Odin. Fenrir, son of Loki, a giant wolf that devoured heaven and earth, and the god who devoured Odin at twilight. Garmla, a hellhound, pet of Hela, and rival of Tyr, the god of war, at twilight, where both perished. Galar, not a person, not a place, but a horn that summons the gods. Its status is similar to the charge, but it seems to have a binding effect on the Aesir. Frey, one of Odin's sons, a figure who's more pretentious than a human. His signature weapon is the Sword of Victory, hence his nickname. Unfortunately, he lost the sword at twilight, and someone else found it and stabbed him to death. Chapter 23 I Want the Wind. The battle began. Lorraine, Henna, Leif, and Bonnet all sped up, each charging towards their opponent. Henna was the fastest, her white tunic rustling in the wind. Her speed peaked in 3 strides, her long legs swiftly shifting, her hands resting against her sides, her body almost parallel to the ground. She leaped. In the instant of her leap, a streak of light shot towards Bonnet's brow. Bonnet roared, deflecting the flying knife, and raised his two-handed greatsword high, slashing the sharp iron blade straight at Henna's brow. Henna drew her knife with a clang, striking the incoming sword. Her rising body instantly sank, seemingly unaffected by the force, and she leaped away. Bonnet felt no reaction from the clash of metal. His full-strength sword seemed to strike empty air, slicing through the logs paving the dock with a swish, sending up a shower of fine wood chips. Frustrated, he drew his sword, shaking his arms and grumbling. Tisk. Why is my opponent a woman? Lorraine and Leif faced each other. Lorraine had a slight advantage in pace, while Leif had a much longer stride. The two men moved at almost the same speed, and within 2 or 3 steps, they had their opponents within striking range. Leif leaped high like a god, his body arched, his battle axe raised high behind him, almost touching his toes. He let out a war cry in the air, and suddenly rebounded like a landslide. Oh, the huge battle axe was danced into a stream of light. The man fell, the axe fell, and the axe chopped down in the direction of Lorraine's advance. There was no way this axe could be blocked head-on. Strong winds and murderous intent rushed towards him, and Lorraine's running body stopped abruptly. He supported himself on the ground with one palm and leaped sideways. Boom! With just one blow, the axe chopped the entire log into pieces, and the broken wood mixed with sand and gravel flew up like smoke and mist, covering an area of 2 or 3 meters. And Lorraine tore through the mist. He supported himself on the ground and moved in an arc to get behind Leif. Without even standing up, he thrust out his sword like a snake, tearing a gash in Leif's thigh, and blood spurted out. Leif cried out in pain and twisted his waist to sweep sideways. He didn't expect Lorraine to still be on the ground. The axe hit nothing, and the door was immediately wide open. Lorraine's face was as gloomy as water. He drew back his sword and thrust it out in one go. As he stood up, the tip of the sword went straight to Leif's heart. Leif tried his best to dodge. However, Lorraine's speed might not be faster than Henna's, but it was much faster than Leif. Leif only had time to avoid a vital point before the long sword rushed in and pierced Leif's left shoulder with a puff. The sword was so painful. Leif screamed in pain, and with red eyes, he stretched out his injured arm, grabbed Lorraine's arm and threw him out. Lorraine was thrown into the air without any preparation, flying 7 or 8 meters, knocking through the crowd and slamming heavily onto the wooden crates piled up at the dock. With a bang, the crates collapsed. Oh, Lorraine struggled to get out of the pile of crates, coughing up blood, and suddenly found himself shrouded in a shadow. Leif rushed over. Lorraine's sword was stuck in his left shoulder, and his axe was pulled in his right hand. The huge round axe blade scraped against the ground, leaving deep cuts in the nearby logs. Leif's movements did not slow down. He was red-eyed and wounded, the blood from his legs soaking through his trouser legs, and the sword on his shoulder tore at his muscles, but his speed not only did not slow down, but it was even faster, more powerful, and more rapid than before. He almost crashed into Lorraine, raised his axe with one arm, and split the sky and the earth. Lorraine was horrified and lowered his head to escape in a panic. Before he could get far, a huge gust of air accompanied by a loud noise lifted him high into the air. Boom! That was a real blast. Lorraine felt himself land on the point of the cannon, and for a moment, he completely lost control of his body. He tumbled, landing hard, once, twice, 3 times. Leif was on him again. Like a giant spirit, He towered over the heavens, his axe cleaving through the sky like a shattering force. Lorraine was furious, gnashing his teeth and rolling around. He wasn't moving away, he was approaching. The earth shook. Leif's axe came down again, a resounding roar and a blast of air that lifted Lorraine up. This time, Lorraine was at the front of the explosion, flying up and crashing directly into Leif. Leif's eyes burned red. His injured arm grabbed Lorraine's leg like lightning, and like an axe, he hurled Lorraine to the ground. Up, down. In a dizzying feeling, as if the world were turning upside down, Lorraine watched the dark brown, dirty log floor approach, but he had no time to react. He had only one chance. In the instant his shoulder passed, he thrust out his hand, firmly grasping the command sword lodged in Leif's shoulder, and pulled back with all his might. The sword ripped free, the wound ripped open. Leif, seemingly unconscious, didn't even wince, but his left hand, weakened by the immense damage, involuntarily released Lorraine's ankle. Lorraine was sent flying through the air by inertia. How could this happen? Leif, his eyes red, tilted his head in confusion, wondering why his prey hadn't had its brains splattered as he'd hoped. But it didn't matter. If it didn't kill him, then chopping him into pieces would be fine. He gripped the axe tightly and took a step towards Lorraine's flight. This was exactly what Lorraine had hoped for. He twisted in midair, plummeting towards the ground, his eyes fixed on the advancing Leif. Leif raised his axe. The moment Leif raised his axe, the moment his body hit the ground, Lorraine swung his sword. The longsword pierced through the air, piercing Leif's forearm, his right arm. Boom. Clank. Lorraine slammed to the ground, his axe falling from his hand. Leif completed the chopping motion, but without his axe, he could only tear through the air. He watched helplessly as Lorraine rolled away like a ball, lying motionless on the ground. Silence. The air was still, the waves were still, the entire battlefield was still, Leif standing and Lorraine lying still. As everyone held their breath, Lorraine trembled. He trembled again, finally raising his arm and pressing it to the ground with a snap. His muscles throbbed like spasms, straining to hold his body up, bit by bit, step by step. His face was covered in blood. From his teeth, beneath his skin, bright red blood dripped onto the ground like a thick paste. His body was covered in bruises from the fall, and blood flowed from his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. Even so, he rose to his feet, clutching his arm and dragging his legs, his eyes bright as the morning stars. "I never thought you were a berserker," Lorraine gritted his teeth. "Berserker, what's so great about you? Who? Isn't he just a Viking?" He suddenly accelerated, stomping his foot hard on the ground. He shouted with all his might, "Njord, I want wind." A violent wind suddenly arose. The windless evening gust suddenly blew up from the bay behind Lorraine and swept onto the land. In a single breath. In a moment, the wind swept across the battlefield on the dock, raising a cloud of sand and wood chips, blurring everyone's vision. In a flash, Lorraine leaped at his opponent, arms outstretched, lifting Leif onto his shoulders. In a flash, Njord and the descendants of Odin ran across the dock's plank road, leaping into the sea at its end. The two separated in midair. Bonnet pushed Henna aside, watching the scene in stunned silence. "Black hair, brown eyes, can call the wind," he exclaimed in disbelief. "A Viking with black hair and brown eyes. This kid is a whaler." Two huge, gorgeous flowers suddenly bloomed on the sea. Puff. Tong. Niled, "I want a ticket." Chapter 24 Assassin Invisibility. After the splash, the water returned to calm. The sudden, dead silence after this climax was chilling. It was like the end of Ragnarok, when the black dragon Nidhogger, a symbol of despair, emerged from the lowest reaches of the world tree, transformed into the sea, and devoured two valiant Viking warriors in a single gulp. One was a berserker, nurtured by Odin in Valhalla, fearless of pain, ever more valiant. The other was a whaler, heir to the blood of Njord, commanding the winds and rains, resilient and stubborn. Both were rare warriors, the finest and purest bloodline of the Vikings. They were pride, history, the mighty force that once dominated the seven seas and made the world tremble. Could such men die? Or rather, could they really die so easily, so eagerly, to return to their own paradise? Hannah's eyes flushed. With narrowed eyes, she slowly peeled off her loose tunic and boots, revealing the pirates the unique, pure white battle robes of the assassins. "Are you also a berserker?" Bonnet sensed a greater threat from this woman, a threat he had never felt before. He gripped the hilt of his sword with both hands, holding it horizontally to his chest. I awakened 2 years after Leif, but, yes, I am also a berserker. If your throat is cut, can you go berserker? Bonnet paused, then slowly shook his head. No, only anger can cause berserkers. Death is death, that's good. Hannah licked the tip of the blade, leaving a piercing crimson. She said, you can die now. Lorraine, carrying Leif, leaped from the water, and both sank to the bottom. The high-altitude water was icy cold, piercing the pain but also invigorating his spirits. Leif, shaken from the bewilderment of losing his enemy, clenched his fists and attacked Lorraine. Lorraine dodged like a fish, swung his legs around to get behind Leif, and threw a punch with his middle finger bent. The punch landed squarely on Leif's waist. Leif seemed oblivious, and rolled over, raising his arms to grab his cunning foe. But Lorraine swam up first, and his heavy leather boots kicked Leif's face, sending out a long string of bubbles. Leif sank even faster. Lorraine rolled over, upside down, and shook his legs to catch up, punching Leif's throat again, sending out a second long string of bubbles. Leif sank deeper and deeper, and Lorraine chased him closer and closer. In the murky bay waters, the double eyelids could help the whaler lock onto his opponent, but the red eyes could not allow the berserker to find his enemy. Just like on land, Lorraine couldn't gain any advantage over Leif no matter how hard he tried, but now he was underwater, the whaler's home turf. The situation was reversed. Leif waved his hands and kicked his legs helplessly on the seabed. Lorraine swam around him, punching him in the chest, throat, cheeks, lungs. Heavy fists hammered down on Leif, each one forcing his mouth open, each one squeezing the air from his veins. Leif's body began to suffocate. A dizziness drove away his frenzy, and the berserker's invisible foe bewildered him. His red eyes gradually faded. Intense pain mingled with a devastating weakness. Leif opened his mouth in despair, mumbling. Hannah was a ghost. She held the dagger upside down, moving at lightning speed, running, leaping, tumbling, twisting, approaching Bonnet again and again, only to give up again and again, retreating. Bonnet couldn't catch up to her movements. Unable to strike back. Unable to move, he was helpless against Hannah, choosing the most un-berserker-like response possible, retreating into his shell like a tortoise, guarding every vital point with his greatsword and instinct. Hannah's face grew increasingly furious, her emerald eyes fixed on Bonnet, growing more intense and sharper. She leaped back, launching a flying knife straight at Bonnet's brow. Bonnet frantically swung his sword to block it. In that brief moment of distraction, Hannah disappeared. Not above him, not below him, not in sight, not in his peripheral vision, not even behind him. Bonnet was horrified to discover that Hannah had vanished completely. Where was she? Hannah was running. Among the assassin's techniques is a unique form of invisibility, visual invisibility. Its fundamental principle is to avoid the target's direct line of sight, avoid peripheral vision at eye level, and operate silently. This process begins the moment the knife is thrown. She leaped backward, aiming to trick Bonnet into looking away immediately after knocking the knife away. In reality, after throwing the knife, Hannah darted sideways, closing in on Bonnet while simultaneously escaping his 120-degree direct field of vision. This was the simplest move. Once out of Bonnet's direct field of vision, she clutched the knife and began circling him, not on 2 feet like a human, but like a cat, on all fours, hands and feet. From the moment she landed on all fours, Hannah vanished from her opponent's sight. Bonnet was tall, over 2 meters tall, with his eyes over 1.8 meters high. Hannah hovered 3 to 5 meters from him, moving fast and slow, mostly staying to the side or directly behind him, occasionally ducking and risking a direct approach from the front, taking the shortest path back to safety. All of this took place in broad daylight. As the onlookers watched, Hannah, with a strange crawling motion, repeatedly attempted to close in on Bonnet and attack. Aside from the change in movement, this was the same routine she'd been using for a long time. Back then, Bonnet couldn't keep up with her speed, his gaze always a beat slower, relying solely on feral instincts and masterful technique to protect his vitals, leaving Hannah no chance to exploit. It looked much the same now. Hannah swam around Bonnet with impeccable grace, approaching, then retreating. Bonnet looked clumsy and helpless, and no one could have imagined he'd actually lost Hannah's trail. But this technique wasn't invincible. Humans aren't truly quadrupedal, after all. No matter how nimble Hannah was, or how expert in cat-fighting techniques she mastered, the constant changes of direction, speed, and even shapeshifting took a toll on her. Furthermore, she had to constantly monitor Bonnet's gaze, constantly calculating and adjusting his field of vision. It was exhausting, both mentally and physically. In just a minute, Henna's short hair was soaked with sweat, her hands and feet began to ache, and her dry throat craved for air. She knew she was reaching her limit. Attacking from this state, no matter what Bonnet's counterattacks, she wouldn't have the energy to evade them. But she didn't care. Back in Cherbourg, Lorraine had taught her through his actions, a crew's duty to their captain. It was a duty, a dignity. Lorraine's captain was Lake, so he risked his life to save him. Upon learning Lake was dead, he gave up the vast wealth within his reach and, without hesitation, chose revenge. Her captain was Lorraine, and Lorraine was dead too. So, there was only one thing left for her to do. Fight tooth and nail, revenge, nothing else. She patiently grappled with Bonnet, 1 minute, 2, until Bonnet completely gave up searching for her. Only then did she finally relax, breathing in and out slowly. Pushing off, striking. Wow! A large, bruised hand emerged from the water, pressing down hard on the dock. Lorraine dragged the unconscious Leif out of the water, scrambling with all her might onto the dock, collapsing on the ground. He grinned. It seems Vanaheim has won this time. Boom. Like a cheetah sculpture being thrown out, Henna hit Bonnet's nose. Bonnet fainted. Chapter 25. Our own people. We are pirates, fierce pirates, with a bottle in our left hand, treasure in our right. We are pirates, skilled pirates, beautiful girls, come into my arms. We are pirates, free pirates, guided by the skull and crossbones. We toil for survival. We are pirates, pirates without tomorrow. There's no end. Drifting on the 7 seas, pirates. To the Vikings, cheers. To the whalers, cheers. To the dusk, cheers. To the Norröten of the sea. And to Valhalla in the sky, 2 cheers. Boys, party all night long. We are pirates, fierce pirates, with a bottle in our left hand, treasure in our right hand. Bright night, starry. A huge bonfire burned on the dock in Stavanger. 40 or 50 slovenly men, their hands and feet remarkably clean, raised their glasses high and sang joyfully around it. This was the gathering of the great Gemini pirates and the equally great Drake Guild. Drake provided the booze, the Geminis provided the men. The pirates linked arms, dancing awkwardly. Little Pierce and Cran, accompanied by the pirate's first mate, enthusiastically toured a brigantine-class Gemini. And there were the protagonists of the Duel of 2 Kings. Henna, the least injured, with a red patch on her forehead, was applying bruise-removing ointment to Lorraine in a corner near the sea. Bonnet was more seriously injured than Henna, but at least a large bandage on his nose didn't affect his drinking. Leif, looking the worst off of the 4, was still unable to move on his own. A doctor from Black Harbor tended to his wounds by the fire. Their treatment consisted of washing, stitching, applying medicine, and bandaging. Lorraine didn't need such a skilled doctor for the time being. He had numerous scrapes and bruises, and his internal organs were displaced to some extent, completely beyond the reach of a surgeon. Henna was tending to his injuries. He was lying comfortably on Henna's plump, soft thighs, facing the bustling conference hall, enjoying the gentle, delicate application, blissful and leisurely. After finishing her back, Henna patted Lorraine's shoulder and asked him to turn over so he could gaze into her emerald eyes, which shone faintly under the night sky. Henna's eyes were beautiful, their deep sockets making them appear particularly large and bright. But Lorraine's attention kept wandering uncontrollably, drifting to the swollen, red bump with a shiny peak beneath the wide hood. It's like having horns. Lorraine chuckled. Henna, you had the knife in your hand at that time, how could you think of hitting someone's nose with your forehead? And breaking it? Henna rolled her eyes at Lorraine in annoyance. If you had come out of the water a little later, I would have cut open his heart. That's really a coincidence. Henna's slender fingers drew circles on Lorraine's heart. Why didn't you kill anyone from the beginning? Did you see that? Henna nodded. Leif is very clumsy. With your swordsmanship, you can pierce his throat from the beginning if you want to kill him. Lorraine shrugged. I didn't expect him to awaken the bloodline of the berserker. I made a mistake. What else? Have you seen that quack doctor? Lorraine pouted in the direction of Leif. His name is Eddie Garman, the 3rd son of Sir Garman. He runs a clinic in the port area, and his main customers are Viking pirates. Henna raised her eyebrows. Did you know it a long time ago? How could that be? Lorraine chuckled bitterly. The pirates dared to enter the harbor flying the pirate flag, which means they don't need to hide their identities here. If that's the case, They must have a good relationship with Sir Garmin. As for the less skilled heir to the throne, it was just a pleasant surprise. Hannah was relieved. When can we see Sir Garmin? 3 days, Lorraine frowned, making himself more comfortable. At least 3 days, before Leif and I can even move. As it turned out, Lorraine had overestimated himself, Leif, and most importantly, the Viking bloodline. It took him 5 days to get out of bed on his own, and Leif a full 7 before he could officially leave the sailors' support. On the 8th day, the group rowed across the channel and, with Dr. Garmin's guidance, landed on the flat grasslands of Ulstein Island. Sir Garmin was a typical Viking nobleman, tall and with strong features. Across Europe, tailcoats and white wigs have become standard attire for the nobility, but he still adheres to the traditions of his ancestors, wrapping himself in bearskin and tattooing his face. He even owns a polar bear named Jarrow. Lorraine saw him in the courtyard of the Ulstein monastery. The knight was lazily leaning on a recliner, with an equally lazily Jarrow at his feet, both with their eyes half closed, making it impossible to tell whether they were awake or asleep. Dr. Garmin acted very reserved in his presence, his hands tucked into his trouser seams, his body standing straight. Instead, Leif, with his arms hanging, smiled and leaned over to him, whispering in a thunderous voice. "Sir, I've brought you a warrior." Sir Garmin half lifted his eyes. "Reckless Ericsson, I heard you got a bad lesson. 1/2 pound, 8 ounces, but I don't see any bandages or splints on him like you do." Leif awkwardly rubbed his bald head. "He's got internal injuries. The bruises just disappeared in the past 2 days." Still trying to be tough, the knight laughed heartily, sat up, and looked at Lorraine with his fingers crossed. "Black hair, brown eyes. Are you a whaler?" Lorraine smiled and nodded. "My mother's name is Helena Arnarsson." Arnarsson, the knight's expression grew serious. "King of Iceland, Ingol Arnarsson, that's my ancestor." The knight stood up with a whoosh and kicked Jarrow. The man and the bear circled Lorraine, then suddenly opened their arms and hugged him tightly. He excitedly shouted to the heavens, "By Odin! The bloodline of Njord has awakened. Our whaler, he's returned." In Stavanger, Sir Garmin's recognition was tantamount to the recognition of the entire Black Harbor. Lorraine realized this the moment he set foot on Black Harbor soil again. He felt like one of the people. In just half a day, the ship's whiskey sold out at an average price of £4 per barrel. All the customers were from the Viking taverns in the harbor, and they had all come to the dock to trade with Lorraine. After deducting the 12% resident transaction tax, Lorraine made a net profit of nearly £230 on this single transaction. With the cargo hold cleared, Lorraine began to explore the local market and, among 3 specialties, felt, smoked fish, and glassware, chose glass as his next stop. The final stop in the Chamber of Commerce's triangular trade would be Spain, and Nordic glass, with its translucent, crystal-like appearance, especially the vessels bearing Catholic motifs, had always enjoyed a good reputation in a large market in Spain. He quickly arranged for a full order of cabin glass, totaling 135 boxes, for £270, with delivery set for tomorrow. Lorraine politely saw the contact off and happened to see Hina practicing knife throwing on the upper deck. On a whim, he asked, "Hina, do you want to go shopping?" P.S. The folk song Pirate Song is from Baidu Encyclopedia. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.